Chapter 363. After living for 100 years, cultivating to the core formation realm, and seeing a lot of cultivators, Emotienga discovered one thing. As long as a person had a firm Tao heart, regardless of whether they were men or women, they would always address them as fellow Taoist. However, when they saw them, they would address them as Mississippi most of the time. They had the intention of being a man or a woman. For example, when Jing Xingji saw a female cultivator for the first time, he would most likely call her Mississippi. Not only did this Black Moon Devil Monarch address her as Miss, but his attitude was also very attentive. If Emotienga couldn't see through his ulterior motives, she'd be playing dumb. However, the situation wasn't clear yet, so it wasn't a bad idea to play dumb. I'm Qin Wei. May I know what advice fellow Taoist Black Moon has for me? Emotienga answered faintly. So it's Miss Qin. Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled at her. It is fate that brought us together. If I have offended you just now, I would like to invite you in as an apology. I wonder if you would do me the honor? Inside the room were the auras of several core formation cultivators, both strong and weak. Because the room was protected by a formation, he couldn't sense them very clearly. However, there were at least 5 of them. It was clear that this group of people was having a gathering. However, he didn't know if these people already knew each other, or if they were like the aura refining and foundation establishment cultivators in the hall, who came here to interact with each other. If it was the latter, it wouldn't be a problem for her to enter. However, if it was the former, it wouldn't be good. While he was hesitating, his gaze suddenly swept over the attendants around him. These low-level aura refining cultivators were looking at them with trepidation. She thought about it and smiled. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Since fellow Taoist Xianyue sincerely invites me, I won't refuse." Hearing this, a smile appeared on Black Moon Devil King's coquettish face. He stepped aside and said, "Miss Qin, please." With a smile on her face, Emotienga put the heaven and earth fan into her sleeve and swaggered into the wing room. What was there to be afraid of? This was the tea house of the Ling family in Sky Snow City. In any case, the Ling family was a large family with a nascent soul cultivator. How could anyone dare to mess around here? Besides, she knew she wasn't a mediocre person. Previously, she obtained so many spiritual treasures from Emo Yaoqing and had already finished refining them, so she had some confidence in protecting herself. Once she entered the side room, Emotienga immediately felt everyone's gaze falling on her. Emotienga swept her gaze around and saw a huge round table in the middle of the room. Around the table sat 6 cultivators. They were all in the core formation realm. Among them, 5 were in the early stage of the core formation realm, and 1 was in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Including the Devil Monarch of the Mystic Moon, he was the only one in the advanced stage of the completion level. When they saw her, a few of them revealed surprised expressions. It was unknown if they were surprised by her youth or her cultivation. This is fellow Taoist Qin? These people all heard the conversation between Emotienga and Black Moon Devil Monarch. At that moment, a middle-aged Confucian scholar stood up and politely cupped his hands. Emotienga showed a faint smile and returned the salute. Yes, her gaze shifted, and she cupped her hands towards the people around her as a greeting. When the others saw this, they didn't dare to dally, and they all stood up to return the greeting. At this moment, Emotienga had already made up her mind. Among these people, there was a scholar in scholarly robes, a bald monk, a beautiful Taoist nun, and there were also people who seemed to be from the devil path. Their outfits were very different, so they probably weren't from the same group. With so many core formation cultivators, it would be too shocking if they were all from the same group. Fellow Taoist Qin, I'm Han Shizhi, a professor at South Zhou Shan Academy. Greetings. This was the scholar in scholarly robes who first greeted her. He was the only cultivator in the middle stage of the core formation realm. This poor monk's dharma name is Yuankong. I'm the supervisor of South Zhou's Taolin Temple. Although this monk looked fierce, his attitude was actually humble and polite. This poor Taoist is Qing Yanzi, an individual cultivator. This was a middle-aged Taoist with a 3-inch-long beard. He had a very sage-like demeanor. My surname is Yang Qingji. The one who spoke was a devil cultivator, whose whole body was hidden in a black cloak. The devil aura around his body was very ostentatious. I'm Yong Ryu, and this is my junior martial sister, Chiu Chungrua. We're both cultivators from Danxia sect. Greetings, fellow Taoist Qin. Upon hearing the words Danxia sect, Mo Tiange's eyes brightened. She then shifted her gaze to this pair of martial siblings. Both of them were dressed in Taoist robes. The man was in his 30s, and the woman was a bit younger. Both of them were in the early stage of the core formation realm. So you're cultivators from Danxia sect. Her thoughts turned at lightning speed. She immediately greeted the two of them. Her attitude towards this pair of martial siblings from Danxia sect was obviously different from the others. Puzzled, Yong Ryu couldn't help but ask, fellow Taoist Qin, could it be that you know people from my Danxia sect? Mo Tiange smiled. I don't know them. However, my ancestor has some connection with Danxia sect. Oh, Chiu Chungrua interrupted and asked, may I know what connection fellow Taoist Qin has with my Danxia sect? Mo Tiange's gaze faintly swept over Chiu Chungrua, who was intentionally or unintentionally holding Yong Ryu's hand. She smiled and said, to be honest, I'm not from Yunzhong. It's just that 1,000 years ago, my ancestor was from Yunzhong. I once heard that when my ancestor was in Yunzhong, he received a favor from Danxia sect. Oh, I see. Yong Ryu and Chiu Chungrua glanced at each other, but didn't say anything. Although Danxia sect had declined, it was still a great cultivation group with tens of thousands of years of inheritance. This kind of thing was too common. Nevertheless, Devil Monarch Black Moon said with great interest, so Miss Qin isn't from Yunzhong. May I know your origin? Why did your ancestor leave Yunzhong back then? As far as I know, the cultivation resources in the outer endless sea can't compare to those in Yunzhong. Mo Tiange smiled and said faintly, I've only lived for more than 100 years. How could I know what happened 1,000 years ago? I only know a few words passed down by my ancestor, so I only have a rough idea of where they came from. What fellow Taoist Qin said makes sense. The middle-aged scholar, Han Shizhi, twirled his beard and said with a smile, no matter what your origin is, since fellow Taoist Qin's ancestor was also from Yunzhong, fellow Taoist Qin can also be considered a person from Yunzhong. I wonder if fellow Taoist Qin returned to Yunzhong from the outer endless sea to look for your roots? Yes. Mo Tiange cast a glance at Yong Ryu, and her martial sister then nodded with a smile. I've heard about Yunzhong since I was a child. It's been so many years since I've seen it, so I've always wanted to come to Yunzhong. Now my wish has finally been fulfilled. Haha, in that case, we can be considered to be fated. Han Shizhi laughed and said, fellow Taoist Qin, please sit. It's too impolite to keep fellow Taoists standing. Mo Tiange still had a smile on her face. She cupped her hands at the 7 people around her, then calmly picked a seat and sat down. Fellow Taoist Qin. This time, the one who spoke was Qin Yanzi. Compared to Han Shizhi, his attitude always carried the estrangement characteristic of individual cultivators. At this moment, he cautiously sized up Mo Tiange, then asked, since fellow Taoist's cultivation level is in the middle stage of the core formation realm, why are you pretending to be a foundation-building cultivator? If it wasn't for fellow Taoist Xuanyue's secret technique, we would have missed you. Upon hearing this question, the 7 people's gazes all fell on her. Mo Tiange knew that although they politely invited her in and greeted her, they were still wary of her. She calmly said with a smile, to be honest, although my ancestors all came from Yunzhong, for more than 1,000 years, almost no other ancestors have set foot here, so I know nothing about Yunzhong. Before I left this time, my master repeatedly warned me to be careful, and not to think I can run amok, just because I have a small cultivation level. There are many talented people in Yunzhong, and every cultivator has extraordinary strength. I mustn't offend others just because I have some magic weapons. Because of this, when I arrived in Yunzhong, I was unfamiliar with the people and the place, so I didn't dare to rashly reveal my cultivation level. What she said was half true and half false. Before she left, Lord Taoist Jinghe indeed warned her to be careful when she went to Yunzhong, which was separated by the ocean. However, Lord Taoist Jinghe was a flamboyant person, so it was impossible for him to say things like not to offend others. Nevertheless, the core formation cultivators present didn't know this. They only felt what Emotinga said was reasonable. Moreover, everyone could hear the admiration she had for Yunzhong in her words. Everyone felt that it was very useful, so they let go of their guard against her. I see. Fellow Taoist Qin is really cautious. But in fact, you don't have to. We cultivators in Yunzhong, whether we're Taoists, Confucians, Buddhists, or devils, don't have any deep hatred. We always don't offend others if they don't offend us. As long as fellow Taoist Qin didn't do anything taboo, we won't show hostility to others at will. Emotinga smiled apologetically. Just now, I chatted with a little friend in the hall for a while, so I also learned about this. It's just that I didn't expect fellow Taoist Xianyue to see through my disguise before I left. Speaking of this, I'm very curious. I'm not boasting, but my breath-concealing technique is passed down from my ancestors. Even nascent soul seniors might not be able to see through it. How did fellow Taoist Xianyue know my real cultivation level at first sight? This was indeed something Emotinga was surprised about. It was fine if Ling Yunhe saw through it. In fact, he only inferred she wasn't a foundation-building cultivator from the aura of spiritual treasures on her body, and didn't really see through it. However, Devil Monarch Xianyue was different. His divine sense was very strong, even stronger than hers, who cultivated the soul-refining art. He seemed to be able to see through her cultivation level directly. This was unusual. Her spirit-concealing pendant was refined by a deification senior. Zhong Muling even clearly said that with the spirit-concealing pendant on her, it wouldn't be a problem even if she wanted to pretend to be immortal. It didn't make sense for a core formation devil cultivator to see through her disguise so easily. After they returned to the wing room, Devil Monarch Xianyue, who had been sitting at the corner of the round table and playing with a teacup, chuckled softly. His gaze swept over Emotinga, and he reached out to stroke his hair narcissistically. He then said, "What's so strange about this? Miss Qin is a Tao cultivator, so you don't understand the matters of us devil cultivators. We devil cultivators naturally have some secret techniques that are very different from you Tao cultivators. To be honest, Miss Qin, your breath-concealing technique is very outstanding. You've been in the hall for so long, but I've never noticed it. However, before we left, you unintentionally released your divine sense. And divine sense happens to be the field I'm most proficient in. So I noticed it." What he said was equivalent to not saying anything. However, Emotinga also knew that some secret techniques would never be taught to outsiders, not even to devil cultivators. Nevertheless, at least she knew what she had overlooked. Devil Monarch Xianyue mentioning divine sense made her realize that she was indeed a bit conceited about her divine sense being superior to others. So she unintentionally released it. Just now, before she left, she just swept the entire tea house with her divine sense out of habit. If it was someone else, they wouldn't have noticed it at all. However, Devil Monarch Xuanyue's divine sense was astonishing, so he saw through her. It seemed she still had to be a bit more cautious. Even if she had the spirit-concealing pendant, she still had to do other things flawlessly. Chapter 364. As it turns out, fellow Taoist Blackmoon's divine sense is outstanding, and you also have a secret technique. I was conceited. Emotinga flattered Devil Monarch Black Moon with a faint smile. The Black Moon demonic monarch's eyes wandered about, looking very pleased with himself. It was unknown whether or not he was deliberately showing off. This time, Emotinga finally saw through him. This devil cultivator was naturally narcissistic. He always had to maintain a natural and unrestrained demeanor. He wasn't deliberately trying to seduce her alone. If that was the case, it wouldn't be hard to get along with him. Then, the 8 of them exchanged some polite words with each other. Finally, the Black Moon Devil Monarch coughed and pulled the topic back. He swept his gaze over everyone before finally resting his gaze on Emotinga. "Miss Qin, just now, the 7 of us were exchanging spiritual objects. I wonder if you're interested?" When she said that, the 7 of them looked at her again. Han Shizhi said with a smile, "Most of us gathered here to look for treasures. Since fellow Taoist Qin came from the outer endless sea, I presume that the spirit items you have are very different from us cloud cultivators. Perhaps we both have something that the other party urgently needs. Exactly. Qing Yunzi smiled. I wonder if fellow Taoist Qing came from Shaoyang or Yuan province. I once wanted to go to the outer endless sea, but I couldn't get away. Until now, I have only been to the inner endless sea. The internal sea referred to the sea area, where some islands near Yunzhong were located. These sea areas were often the strongholds for cultivators to catch sea beasts, such as North Pole Island. As for the external sea, it referred to places like Yuan Province and Shaoyang, which were separated from Yunzhong Ocean. Mo Tiange just smiled and softly changed the topic. The place I came from is a bit different from Shaoyang and Yuanzhou. However, perhaps there really is something you need there. Hearing this, the Black Moon Devil Monarch said, Since Miss Qin doesn't object, does that mean you'll be participating in the exchange? Mo Tiange nodded, indicating she had no objections. The Black Moon Devil Master smiled and glanced at the crowd. He continued, Before Lady Qin joined us, we just finished talking about cultivation. Since that's the case, let's begin. A trade fair organized by cultivators was naturally different from the one organized by Shang clan. No one was introducing treasures, and no one was stirring up the atmosphere. Among them, the mystic moon demonic monarch had the highest cultivation, so he tacitly agreed to be the host. After saying this, the Black Moon Devil Monarch threw out a few items and said casually, See if you're interested in these items. You can exchange them with items, or buy them with spirit stones. Mo Tiange looked down and saw several kinds of ores, spiritual plants, and a magic weapon on the table. The cultivation method of fiendish cultivators was different from that of Taoist cultivators. Therefore, the materials needed for elixirs and spiritual treasures were different from those for Taoist cultivators. These spiritual herbs and minerals were good materials for Taoist cultivators to refine elixirs and spiritual treasures, but they were not very useful for fiendish cultivators. This was even more so for Dharma treasures. Therefore, the Black Moon Devil Monarch did not even bat an eye when he threw these things out. Ores and spiritual plants were all good things, but Mo Tiange didn't need them. Nevertheless, that magic weapon made her take a few more glances at it. This magic treasure looked like a mottled embroidered sword. There was a lot of dust on it, but it faintly exuded an extraordinary aura of wind and thunder. She couldn't figure out what was going on with this magic treasure. If it was really a spiritual treasure, it shouldn't have such mottled embroidery, right? It wasn't like it was an ordinary iron from the secular world. But if it was an ordinary object, how could it have such a strong aura? Ordinary magic treasures would only have such an aura when they were in use. Just by throwing it here, it already had such an aura. Almost only a magic treasure with a spirit would have such an aura. The ores and spiritual plants were quickly exchanged by the other people. In the end, everyone's eyes were on this magic treasure. Like Mo Tiange, they couldn't figure out the details of this magic treasure. For a moment they hesitated, not knowing whether they should exchange it or not. The Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled and said leisurely to the crowd, Is everyone not interested in this Fuxing sword? His words stunned everyone. Yong Ryu and Qiu Chengrua looked shocked. Even Qing Yanzi, Yuan Kong, and the others' expressions froze. They stared motionlessly at the rusted sword on the table. Fuxing sword? Could it be Senior Fu Yao's Fuxing sword? Yong Ryu stared at the rusted sword and asked nervously. The Black Moon Devil Monarch raised his eyebrows and showed a faint smile. Otherwise, fellow Taoist Yong, do you think there's another Fuxing sword? After getting an affirmative answer, everyone's expressions became more interesting. Yong Ryu, Qiu Chengrua, and Qing Yanzi looked nervous, while Yuan Kong and Han Shizhi looked odd. Mo Tiange was confused. Fuxing sword? Fu Yao. What's that? Black Moon Devil Monarch cast a glance at her and showed a bewitching smile. Miss Qin, you're not from Yunzhong, so it seems you've never heard of the Fuxing sword and Fu Yaozi? Mo Tiange nodded. I haven't been in Yunzhong for long, so I've never heard of them. May I know what this Fuxing sword is? And who is Fu Yaozi? Fuxing sword is Senior Fu Yaozi's sword. The one who answered was Yong Ryu. He took a deep breath and calmed down a little. He looked at Mo Tiange and said, Senior Fu Yaozi is a legendary senior expert in Yunzhong. He was a cultivator from tens of thousands of years ago. He didn't belong to any sect or sect, and was just an individual cultivator. Relying on his divine power, he moved unhindered in Yunzhong. Even the cultivators from Yuanzhou and Shaoyang City had to bow down to him. When he was alive, the devil path and the Tao couldn't coexist. Because of him, the devil path was suppressed to the point where it almost had no place to stand. According to the ancient records, when he was still in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he fought 10 nascent soul devil monarchs alone, and didn't show any signs of losing. In the end, those 10 devil monarchs had to retreat to the Sea of Returning Ruins. Not only that, Qing Yanzi's expression was full of reverence as he continued to say, although he was an individual cultivator, he created a whole set of cultivation techniques for Tao cultivators and passed them on to the world. He also shared his cultivation experience with the public without reservation, allowing many individual cultivators to walk on the right path of cultivation. In the past tens of thousands of years, although Senior Fu Yaozi didn't pass down his cultivation group and didn't have any disciples, countless cultivators benefited from him and called themselves his successors. At this point, Qing Yanzi added, "This humble Taoist is the same. There's actually such a person in Yunzhong." Mo Tiange was greatly astonished. The path of cultivation was full of thorns and thorns. It was normal for cultivators to kill each other. Cultivation experience was a cultivator's secret, but he actually made it all public. It was really shocking. This Senior Fu Yaozi isn't just that. Han Shizhi answered with a smile. He was a professor at the academy, so his knowledge was naturally extensive. As far as I know, this Senior Fu Yaozi not only has tyrannical strength, but he also has a unique understanding of morality. I once read about Senior Fu Yaozi's morality in an ancient book. It's very different from the fellow Taoists who cultivate the Tao today. This Senior Fu Yaozi believes that cultivators have more power than mortals, so they should bear more responsibility. When a kind of power loses its restraints, it will affect the laws of heaven and earth. Therefore, not only should cultivators not kill each other, but they should also help each other. Mo Tiange was stunned. She muttered, "Shouldn't kill each other, but should also help each other." Correct. Qing Yanzi sighed and said, "Senior Fu Yaozi has always held this kind of philosophy all his life. Even if he once killed someone, he could still let go of the enmity with a smile. He's really magnanimous. This kind of broad-mindedness has never been seen in Yunzhong for more than 100,000 years. He can actually cultivate to the nascent soul realm." Mo Tiange was very shocked. Could such a person really walk to the end of the path of cultivation? Not just the nascent soul realm, Yong Ryu said. Senior Fu Yaozi has always been moving unhindered in Yunzhong. It's said that he finally advanced to the deification realm. However, this is only a legend. There are many different opinions about Senior Fu Yaozi's final outcome in ancient books, so no one knows which one is true. But one thing is certain, Black Moon Devil Monarch answered. He seemed to be very disapproving of Yong Ryu, Qing Yanzi, and the others' words, and his expression was very unhappy. Fu Yaozi is the idol of all cultivators in Yunzhong. Just now, Yong Ryu said that in the era Fu Yaozi lived in, Yunzhong's Tao and devil monarchs were irreconcilable, and Fu Yaozi once defeated 10 devil monarchs. Black Moon Devil Monarch was a devil cultivator, so he naturally didn't like Fu Yaozi. However, no matter how much he disliked him, he had to admit that Fu Yaozi's strength was indeed outstanding. I see. Mo Tiange was very fascinated. Unfortunately, this Senior Fu Yaozi lived tens of thousands of years ago. Otherwise, I really want to see his elegant demeanor. We Tao cultivators are all like this. Seeing her fascinated expression, Yong Ryu immediately felt close to her, so she said with a smile. However, Qiu Chungrua glared at her angrily and pinched her hand. Seeing this scene, Mo Tiange couldn't help but smile. No matter how clumsy her eyes were, she could see that this pair of martial brother and sister had a relationship. Now that her heart belonged to someone else, she naturally wouldn't provoke others. However, this Qiu Chungrua was too nervous. Could it be that just because a woman said something to Yong Ryu, she would suspect that she had a disloyal heart? Yongri didn't seem to notice it at all. Her gaze once again fell on the Fuxing sword on the table. Fellow Taoist Black Moon, where did you get this Fuxing sword? If it's Senior Fu Yaozi's relic, it must be extremely expensive. Black Moon Devil Monarch raised his eyelids and said, I obtained this sword by accident. After many verifications, I confirmed that it was Fu Yaozi's Fuxing sword. I asked many Devil Path seniors, and this sword disappeared when the 10 Devil Monarchs fought Fu Yao. It was probably left in the Devil Domain at that time. You don't need to be so scared. Although the Fuxing sword is powerful, this sword isn't the complete Fuxing sword. Hearing this, Qing Yanzi was stunned and asked anxiously, Fellow Taoist Black Moon, what do you mean? Black Moon Devil Monarch said lazily, do you think this sword will still be full of spiritual aura after tens of thousands of years, and being corroded by devil aura in the devil domain? Yong Ruyu and the others were stunned, but the excited expressions on their faces calmed down a little. Yes, the devil domain was full of devil aura. If this treasure was left in the devil domain, it would definitely be corroded by the devil aura. After tens of thousands of years, it was already rare that it didn't turn into a pile of ordinary iron. Qing Yanzi thought for a moment, then asked cautiously, Fellow Taoist Black Moon, do you think this sword can still be used? Since I took it out to trade, it's naturally still useful, Black Moon Devil Monarch said faintly. Speaking of which, this sword is worthy of being Fu Yaozi's sword. After being corroded by devil aura for tens of thousands of years, it unexpectedly still retains the momentum of a spiritual treasure. Of course, everyone here understands that this sword definitely can't be used directly. It needs to dissolve the devil aura and be refined again to recover some of its original power, but only a little. Chapter 365. A sword from tens of thousands of years ago, that had been stored in the devil's domain, where devil cultivators lived for tens of thousands of years, couldn't be intact. Yong Ruyu and Qing Yunzi also understood this point, but they still couldn't hide their disappointment after hearing Black Moon Devil Monarch's words. This was Fu Yaozi's sword, but it still had this kind of momentum. One could imagine how powerful it was in the past. Of course, if it hadn't been corroded by devil aura, nascent soul cultivators wouldn't have had the chance to take a fancy to core formation cultivators like them. After figuring this out, the two of them regained some of their composure. Qing Yunzi looked at the sword and asked cautiously, Fellow Taoist Black Moon, what do you want to exchange this sword for? How many spirit stones do you want? Black Moon Devil Monarch played with the spirit stones he had just exchanged and said casually, We devil cultivators are different from you righteous cultivators. We need a special mental cultivation method to absorb spirit stones for our own use. Usually we just use them like money, so you don't have to exchange them for spirit stones. If you see something suitable for devil cultivators, just give it to me. When he finished speaking, Qing Yunzi and Yong Ruyu both had a troubled expression on their faces. It wasn't easy to find things for devil cultivators. After all, the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was the main source of energy for devil cultivators. In the beginning, devil cultivators used spiritual aura for their cultivation. Later, devil cultivators gathered in one place to cultivate, and the devil's domain was full of devil aura. Things that could be directly used by devil cultivators usually grew in devil's domain. There weren't many devil's domains in Yunzhong, only some specific places in northern Qilin Nation. The devil's domain was small and didn't have many resources. If there were, they would have been taken away by the local devil cultivators. They were pure Dao cultivators, so where could they get things for devil cultivators? Devil Monarch Black Moon obviously understood their difficulties, but he didn't back down. He picked up the rusty Fuxing sword, cast a sidelong glance at the two of them, then looked at Mo Tiange. Miss Qin is also a cultivator. Are you interested in this Fuxing sword? Mo Tiange glanced at Yong Ruyu and Qing Yanzi then said, I'm naturally interested, but fellow Taoist Yong and fellow Taoist Qingyan are very interested in this sword. I've only just arrived here, so how could I snatch it away? He paused for a moment before continuing. Moreover, it's really hard to find demonic cultivators' items. I'm afraid that fellow Taoist Xianyue won't be interested in the things I have on me. The Black Moon Devil Master smiled and said, "What's wrong with that? It's up to me whether I like him or not. Since Miss Qin has participated in our trade fair, she naturally has the qualifications to exchange. Fellow Taoists, don't you think so?" The Black Moon Devil Monarch was in the late stage of the core formation realm, while Yong Ruyu and Qin Yunzi were only in the early stage of the core formation realm. How could they dare to act tough in front of him? Moreover, what the Black Moon Devil Monarch said made sense. The trade fair was free to trade, and it was all up to the owner's preference. Seeing the two of them nod, the Black Moon Devil Monarch smiled and said, "All right, what do you have, Miss Qin? You can take it out and let us see." Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still took something out of her robe. She'd been to Demonic Mountain before. Demonic Mountain used to be the battlefield of the righteous path and the devil path. Countless treasures of the righteous path and the devil path were left there. Although most of them had been taken away by the predecessors, there were always some special things in that place where devil aura intertwined. She picked up a lot of people's chinquan bags inside. She wasn't interested in these things, so he practically put them all into her pocket. There were some strange things produced on Demonic Mountain, but she didn't know much about devil cultivators, so she didn't know whether these things were useful, or whether Black Moon Devil Monarch would like them or not. The Black Moon Devil Monarch watched as she took out a chinquan bag from her robe, and took out things one by one. At first, his expression was indifferent, probably because these things didn't catch his eye, but as Mo Tiange took out more and more things, the Black Moon Devil Monarch's expression gradually became a bit surprised. When she took out one thing, he actually stood up abruptly. Mo Tiange stopped. The thing she took out was a jade box with a small black flower inside. She didn't know what it was, but she felt the devil aura was very heavy. She looked at Black Moon Devil Monarch's expression, and thought this must be some kind of treasure, to be able to shock a core formation devil cultivator so much. It was to the extent that even the other devil cultivator, Yang Qingji, who had not made a sound and was quietly sitting in the corner, moved his body, his gaze fixed on her hand. "This thing. Does fellow Taoist Black Moon like it?" Black Moon Devil Monarch exhaled, and slowly recovered his bewitching and narcissistic expression. He nodded and said, "This flower is called Devil Gathering Flower. It can only grow in places where devil aura is very abundant. The flower in Miss Qin's hand is at least 2,000 years old. It's enough to exchange for this Fuxing sword." Mo Tiange nodded and smiled. "Fortunately, if it still doesn't work, I'll have to give up. Does fellow Taoist Black Moon mean you're willing to exchange the Fuxing sword for this devil gathering flower?" "Of course." Black Moon Devil Monarch simply threw the Fuxing sword in his hand to her. "This sword belongs to Mississippi." Mo Tiange closed the jade box, and also threw it to Black Moon Devil Monarch. The two of them confirmed it, and the transaction was completed. Both Yong Ruyu and Qin Yunzi sighed when they saw this. This fellow Taoist Qin was also a Tao cultivator. Since she heard about the Fuxing sword's origin, she naturally wouldn't give it to her. The two of them could be considered to have missed the opportunity to obtain the Fuxing sword. After Black Moon Devil Monarch and Mo Tiange finished their transaction, Yang Qingji, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke and stopped Mo Tiange from putting the things away. "Fellow Taoist Qin, these things are all devil cultivators' things. Are you willing to exchange them?" Mo Tiange smiled. "Of course. I'm a Tao cultivator. What use do I have for these things?" Yang Qingji thought for a moment, then opened his chinquan bag, and threw several things out. "Then fellow Taoist Qin, take a look. Do you need these things?" Mo Tiange stared at the things Yang Qingji threw on the table. They were all beast cores, most of which were 5th and 6th rank. There were more than a dozen of them. This surprised Mo Tiange a bit. Yang Qingji was only in the early stage of the core formation realm, but he actually had so many 5th and 6th rank beast cores. Apparently, his skills were quite extraordinary. She once heard that although devil path cultivators were prone to chi energy deviation, their fighting abilities were stronger than righteous path cultivators in the same realm. She was skeptical at first, but now that she saw Yang Qingji taking out so many beast cores so easily, it was most likely true. These beast cores made the others very envious. Even Han Shiji gasped in admiration several times. Beast cores were one of the few things that didn't belong to the righteous path, or the devil path. Both righteous path and devil path cultivators could use them. The difference was that righteous path cultivators mostly used them to concoct medicinal pills, while devil path cultivators mostly swallowed them directly. It wasn't that she didn't want these beast cores. They were equivalent to medicinal pills. She also learned the method of directly taking beast cores from Bishuan court, so she could use them all no matter how many she had. However, the problem was that she didn't know the value of these devil cultivator things in her hands, so she didn't know how to exchange them. She thought for a moment then said, "What does fellow Taoist Yang want to exchange for?" Yang Qingji's expression couldn't be clearly seen under his cloak. He said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you should know the value of these beast cores. They're enough to exchange for most of the things on the table. If fellow Taoist Qin trusts me, are you willing to let me choose for myself?" Mo Tiange only considered it for a moment before she smiled and agreed. "Sure." Yang Qingji nodded. "Thank you." As he spoke, he raised his hand. The things on the table flew towards him one by one as if they were being pulled. By the time most of the things were in his hands, he pushed his hand forward, throwing the beast cores on the table towards Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange caught all of them. She only took a brief look at the quality of the beast cores, then threw them into her Qingkuan bag. She then put away the remaining things on the table. After this transaction was completed, the scene was silent for a while. Because the things Devil Monarch Black Moon took out were too astonishing, the people behind him simply couldn't muster up the spirit to continue the transaction. In the end, it was Devil Monarch Black Moon who broke the silence. He asked Mo Tiange in a seemingly careless manner, "This monarch can see that Miss Qin is a pure Dao cultivator. So why do you have so many things used by devil cultivators? Could it be that Mrs. Hometown is also the devil domain?" Mo Tiange smiled faintly then shook her head. "Since fellow Taoist Black Moon knows I'm a pure Dao cultivator, why would I live in the devil domain? I just had a conflict with several devil cultivators and obtained these things from them." "Oh, so that's how it is." What she meant was that these things were obtained from killing devil cultivators. Although she had a lot of things in her hands, they were very messy, so their total value wasn't very high. It would be believable if she said they were the possessions of one or two devil cultivators. In the current Yunzhong continent, the situation was no longer one where the righteous and devil paths could not coexist, so Devil Monarch Black Moon and Yang Qingji didn't react to what she said. Devil Monarch Black Moon was very happy to obtain the treasures he was satisfied with. He squinted at the others and said, "All right, Miss Qin has finished her transaction with us. Which fellow Taoist wants to exchange with us next?" After a moment of silence, Monk Yuan Kong called out the name of Buddha. "Amitabha, this poor monk has something to exchange." Devil Monarch Black Moon didn't even bother to say anything. He just stretched out his hand, signaling him to take out the item. Monk Yuan Kong also didn't waste any time. He directly took out a jade box and opened it. In an instant, the whole room was filled with a dazzling seven-colored light. Seven-colored jade heart lotus. Han Shiji cried out in surprise. Mo Tiange still didn't know anything about this item. However, judging by how it was overflowing with spiritual aura, she knew it was an extremely rare spiritual item. Moreover, Han Shiji looked so shocked. "Benefactor Han has good eyes. This is indeed the seven-colored jade heart lotus." Monk Yuan Kong smiled faintly. Although his appearance was very ugly and looked quite ferocious, his smile was filled with a kind and holy feeling. Perhaps this is the so-called Buddha's nature? Mo Tiange thought to herself. What does Master Yuan Kong want to exchange for? The one who spoke was Qiu Qingrua. She stared unblinkingly at the seven-colored jade heart lotus. Ever since Mo Tiange entered the room, this was the first time this beautiful Taoist nun acted like a cultivator instead of a wife strictly supervising her husband. Monk Yuan Kong still smiled faintly and said in a neither hurried nor slow manner, "Benefactor Qiu, this poor monk already said that in my early years, my sins of killing were very heavy. Now, I'm plagued by a demonic barrier, and it's difficult for me to advance my cultivation. Therefore, I want to exchange this item for something that can reduce my sins of killing and remove my demonic barrier. Benefactor, do you have it? Chapter 366. In the end, Monk Yuan Kong's 7-colored jade heart lotus was exchanged by Yong Ruyu with a Buddhist treasure. Qiu Chunghua happily put the 7-colored jade heart lotus into his bag. Qing Yanzi took a fancy to the Fuxing sword while Han Shizhi took a fancy to the 7-colored jade heart lotus. Soon after, the two of them took out their own things and exchanged some passable spiritual objects with others. The core formation cultivators were very straightforward, and there were only 8 people present, so the trade fair ended very quickly. Then, everyone began to talk about cultivation. This process was an eye-opener for Emotienga. It was the first time she met devil cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, and Confucian cultivators above the core formation realm. The experiences of Black Moon Devil Monarch, Yang Qingji, Monk Yuan Kong, and Han Shizhi were completely different from what she had heard before. No matter what Dao they walked, they were all cultivators, so they had quite a lot in common, which helped Emotienga figure out some difficult cultivation problems. This conversation lasted for half the night before Emotienga bid farewell to everyone and left the tea house. When she stepped out of the tea house, the full moon was already hanging in the sky. The night was dark, and countless stars were blinking in the sky, reflecting the bright blue color of Sky Snow City, giving it a different kind of beauty. She admired it for a while before slowly walking towards the cave on Whitestone Mountain. She looked leisurely, but in fact her fists were clenched and hidden in her sleeves, hiding her excitement very well. When she got the Fuxing sword, her attitude was very calm, and she didn't look very excited, but in fact, her heart was full of excitement. As soon as she left the tea house, she couldn't suppress it anymore. That sword was definitely unusual, not to mention that it was corroded by devil aura for 10,000 years without being completely corroded. Its momentum alone could only be found on some spiritual treasures. If she could find a way to wash away the devil aura and restore it to its former glory, it would definitely be an extremely sharp magic weapon. With this thought she smiled. One could never have too many spiritual treasures. Although her cultivation level was exposed this time, her harvest was quite plentiful. Just as she left the streets of Sky Snow City, and before she reached Whitestone Mountain, she suddenly felt her back tighten. Instinctively, the heaven and earth fan appeared in her hand. With a light wave, a spiritual aura barrier appeared around her. Soon after, with a soft chi sound, something tore open the spiritual energy barrier behind her. Emotienga tapped the ground with the tip of her foot. Clouds appeared on the soles of her feet as her cloud-treading boots flew up. Like a willow in the wind, she streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of drifting traces in the air. In the end she turned around and stopped. Which fellow Taoist launched a sneak attack on me? Please show yourself. Standing in midair, Emotienga gently tapped the heaven and earth fan in her hand and looked around sharply. Humph! She heard a cold snort. Someone spoke in a hoarse voice. Hand over the Fuxing sword and I'll let you go. Supporting life sword? Emotienga was stunned. It wasn't that she didn't expect someone would covet the Fuxing sword. It was just that she didn't expect they would come knocking on her door so soon. Who was this person? Yong Ryu or Qing Yanzi? The two of them didn't have any abnormalities just now. Could it be someone else? On top of that, this person's sneak attack was very precise. His cultivation level was at least of the intermediate stage of the completion level. Could it be Han Shizhi? Not giving her much time to think, another sharp spiritual energy suddenly appeared in the air and attacked her. Emotienga also let out a cold snort. No matter who it was, this person looked down on her too much. Emotienga touched her sleeve and waved the white silk handkerchief. A faintly discernible mist enveloped her. The spiritual aura smoothly entered the mist, but in the next moment, it disappeared into the mist and disappeared without a trace. Oh, the person was surprised but soon sneered. You do have some skills. I underestimated you. Emotienga showed a faint smile, gently opened the heaven and earth fan and said, No matter who you are, if you don't want to die, you'd better scram quickly. Upon hearing what she said, the person burst into laughter. Interesting. Are all cultivators in the outer endless sea as arrogant as you? Whether I'm arrogant or not, I'll know after I fight you. Emotinga's gaze turned slightly cold. It seems your excellency is determined to rob me? So what if I rob you? The Fusheng sword. Even if it's just a Fusheng sword that can only recover a little of its power, it's still no small matter. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being too bold. People from the outer endless sea actually dare to carry such a treasure in Yunzhong. Even if I don't do it, someone else will. Then let's see how you do it. Before he finished speaking, the heaven and earth fan unfolded, and seemingly invisible mountains and rivers sprayed out in an instant. The person didn't expect Emotinga to act so quickly. Before he finished speaking, she had already used her magic weapon. In the darkness, a black thing splashed over, trying to block the mountains and rivers transformed by the heaven and earth fan. Emotinga smiled slightly and withdrew the mountains and rivers. Like a flash of lightning, she retreated dozens of feet away. With a crane cry, a red-crowned crane rushed out of the heaven and earth fan and pecked at her right side. Ah! With a cry of alarm, a figure suddenly appeared in the darkness. This person was also very fast. With a flash, he was already dozens of feet away, blocking the red-crowned crane with a huge stone. Emotinga waved the fan lightly, and the red-crowned crane disappeared without a trace. She smiled at the person in the darkness. Professor Han, it's really you. Dozens of feet away, Han Shiji glared at Emotinga with a gloomy expression. Just now, although he blocked the red-crowned crane's attack in time, Emotinga was simply a diversion. She used flying needles to launch a sneak attack under the crane's cover. Although she didn't really succeed, the feeling of almost being hit was really bad. Han Shiji always thought the level of the cultivators in the outer endless sea couldn't compare to the cultivators in Yunzhong, so he boldly came to attack her. He didn't expect Emotinga to have so many magic weapons in her hands. Not only did she easily dodge his rhino telepathy, but she also unexpectedly launched a sneak attack on him. He almost died because of his own carelessness, but from now on he wouldn't be careless anymore. With the golden brush and jade inkstone in his hands, even if this woman had many magic weapons, he wouldn't lose. Emotinga didn't attack immediately. She looked at Han Shiji and asked with a smile, Professor Han, I don't quite understand. Aren't you a Confucian cultivator? The Fusheng sword is a Taoist cultivator's item. What do you want it for? Han Shiji snorted coldly. What do you know? How can magic weapons be divided by schools? Confucian cultivators, Taoist cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, don't they all transform spiritual aura for their own use? Emotinga was stunned. She didn't expect he would actually say this. She carefully pondered it in her heart, and suddenly felt enlightened. For a moment, she came to a sudden realization and understood. Yes, Confucian cultivators, Taoist cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, and even devil cultivators were all cultivators. Although their respective doctrines were different, their cultivation methods were different, and their methods of transforming spiritual aura were also different. There wasn't much difference in essence. They all cultivated and similarly transformed the spiritual aura of heaven and earth for their own use. They also strengthened their bodies, cultivated their meridians and dantian, and advanced their realms step by step to pursue the ultimate goal of ascension. She was too trapped by the views of schools. She always felt that cultivators of other Daos might be able to learn a thing or two from them. But they were always different. In fact, their essence should be the same, but their external situations were different. Looking at Han Shiji in the darkness, she had a mysterious feeling. This Han Shiji came to snatch her treasures, and even to kill her. His words were very ruthless, so it was obvious that his previous erudition and elegance were all fake. In fact, he was a ruthless person. However, this person had such a deep understanding of morality, almost seeing through the true meaning of cultivators of various Daos. His unintentional words suddenly made her feel as if her state of mind had transcended. She didn't know whether she should thank this person or not. Professor Han is really a knowledgeable person. You can actually comprehend this kind of truth. That being the case, why is your state of mind so weak? Sneak attacks aren't magnanimous. Don't you Confucian cultivators pursue upright conduct and firm will? Aren't you afraid of having inner demons? Han Shiji smiled contemptuously and looked at Emotinga. You don't need to talk so eloquently. You only know a little bit about us Confucian cultivators' cultivation methods. What inner demons? It's nothing more than acting against one's own morality. If there's no morality, how can there be any violation? Although your cultivation level isn't bad, you're just a silly little girl. Being looked down upon like this, Emotinga didn't show any anger. She pondered Han Shiji's words. If there's no morality, how can there be any violation? Is that really the case? If devil path cultivators didn't cultivate their minds, it was easy for them to suffer from chi deviation, but they could also ascend and become devils. Many nascent soul cultivators in the celestial pole were afraid of inner demons, so they wouldn't harm people's lives for no reason. Even their temperamental master was the same. However, the number one late nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole was Master Songfeng, that fiend. The reason was actually this simple. If there's no morality, how can there be any violation? Because cultivators like them were instilled with the concept of don't lightly harm people's lives, and be careful of inner demons since childhood. They always believed that if they hurt people for no reason, they would have inner demons. Because of this, when they hurt people for no reason, they would be trapped by inner demons. Master Songfeng said he was neither a Dao nor a devil, neither a human nor a ghost. In other words, his concept was different from that of cultivators. Could it be that because he didn't have any morality in his heart, he didn't have any inner demons even if he violated them? So he could become the number one late-stage nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole by hook or by crook? Emotinga fell into contemplation. Han Shiji smiled coldly and suddenly pulled out his hand. The ink brush and the jade inkstone flew out at the same time. Fellow Taoist Qin. Just as the ink brush was about to splash on Emotinga's body, a clear shout was heard. Someone flew out, and a lightning-like light instantly blocked the ink brush. That person stretched out his hand, and a crescent-shaped jade knife flew back into his hand. His figure was already in front of Emotinga. You! Seeing the apricot-colored Taoist robe this person was wearing, Han Shiji was shocked. You're. Under the moonlight, this person's cold gaze fell on Han Shiji. He said heavily, Han Shiji? You came to my Sky Snow City and killed people in my Ling clan's territory. Aren't you looking down on my Ling clan too much? Under this person's cold gaze, Han Shiji's ruthless expression slowly disappeared. He exhaled and said, Since fellow Taoist Ling made a move, I won't say much. Today's matter will end here. Wait! Seeing that Han Shiji was about to turn around and leave, this person shouted. He stared at Han Shiji with a gloomy expression. You want to leave just like that? Han Shiji paused, then turned around and said faintly, Ling Yunhe, I gave up this matter to give face to Ling clan. What about you? Don't tell me you want a foot after giving me an inch? Under the moonlight, Ling Yunhe's expression was gloomy. Give face to Ling clan? You're casually making a move on my Ling clan's territory. Is this still giving face to Ling clan? Otherwise what? Han Shiji's expression was still indifferent. You also know you can't do anything to me, so why stop me? As he said that, he actually waved his sleeves and swaggered away. In the end, Ling Yunhe didn't stop him. Chapter 367. Looking at Ling Yunhe's expression, Emotinga was a bit uncertain about his relationship with Han Shiji. They recognized each other as soon as they saw each other, so they were obviously old acquaintances. Moreover, there was a sense of familiarity in their conversation, as if they knew each other's situation very well. It seemed they had known each other for a long time. They didn't seem to be enemies or friends. They both feared each other deeply, but they didn't intend to be enemies. However, since Ling Yunhe helped her, he wasn't her enemy for now. Fellow Taoist Ling, Emotinga quickly smiled. Thank you for helping me, fellow Taoist Ling. Ling Yunhe withdrew his gaze and waved at her. Even if I didn't make a move, fellow Taoist Qin wouldn't have lost to Han. You don't have to thank me. Emotinga smiled. Her impression of this cloud-soaring crane became even more favorable. Although Han Shiji's strength was extraordinary, she was confident she wouldn't lose. However, Ling Yunhe scared him away, which saved her a lot of effort. After all, Han Shiji wasn't an ordinary person. If they really fought, it would be difficult for her to come out unscathed. The most rare thing was that Ling Yunhe helped her, but didn't take credit for it. From this point of view, he was a smart person. He didn't force her to repay his kindness, but he made Mo Tiange have a good impression of him. Therefore, she inevitably had to think about the matter of Carefree Valley. "Why are you here, fellow Taoist Ling?" Mo Tiange asked. "Could it be that you couldn't sleep at night and came out to take a walk?" She said this with a smile. They were both core formation cultivators, so why would they need to sleep? Ling Yunhe knew she was teasing him. He also smiled and said, "If cultivators didn't need to sleep, I really wouldn't have been able to sleep." Mo Tiange didn't expect to get such an answer. She was startled, but she guessed why he said that, so she hesitated. Ling Yunhe helped her just now, so she should express her concern. However, if she continued to talk about it, it would inevitably involve Ling clan's secrets. She came to Yunzhong to see the scenery and make friends with Yunzhong's cultivators. But she didn't want to get involved in these grudges. Since he was able to become a candidate for the sect leader, Ling Yunhe was naturally a sensitive person. As soon as he saw her expression, he thought of a reason. He smiled indifferently and changed the topic. "How did fellow Taoist Qin offend Han Shiji?" This person is a professor of the Southern Zhou country's Yushan Academy. He is famous for his ruthlessness and for hiding a dagger in his smile. Although fellow Taoist Qin's methods are extraordinary, you might not be able to guard against this person's sneak attack. Really, upon hearing what he said, Mo Tiange became a bit curious about Han Shiji. As far as I know, most Confucian cultivators cultivate their minds and cultivate their character. Why does Han Shiji have such a personality? Ling Yunhe shook his head and let out a sigh. Although this Han Shiji has a vicious personality, he is a genius in terms of cultivation. He liked to walk the unorthodox path, but he was very good at studying Confucian scriptures. What he cultivates is a Confucian mental cultivation method, but it is a mental cultivation method that he has researched and created himself. What? Mo Tiange was shocked. He's only in the core formation realm, but he can already create his own cultivation method? She couldn't be blamed for being so shocked. Creating a cultivation method wasn't a simple matter. The cultivation methods that existed in the cultivation world today were either adapted from cultivation methods left over from the Middle Ages era, or they were created by some big sects after several generations of patching and patching. Although some cultivation methods were created by cultivators themselves, these cultivators were all nascent soul cultivators, and all of them were outstanding geniuses. Nowadays, the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was scarce, and many cultivation methods couldn't be cultivated to the peak. Cultivators' use of spiritual aura was incomparable to that of ancient cultivators. Creating a cultivation method was indeed difficult for ordinary cultivators. Ling Yunhe understood Mo Tiange's surprise very well. He smiled helplessly and said, "That's why I said he's a genius." Seemingly intrigued by this topic, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Taoist Qin isn't a cultivator from Yunzhong, so you might not understand the situation there. Southern Zhou country is the territory of Buddhist and Confucian cultivators. The Yushan Academy is the largest academy in Southern Zhou country. Being able to become a professor in this academy isn't just because your cultivation level is high. Oh, I really haven't had much contact with Confucian cultivators, so I don't know about the academy's situation. Could it be that professor isn't a title for core formation cultivators? Of course not." Ling Yunhe shook his head. In Southern Zhou country, the academy is a school for Confucian cultivators. Ordinary Confucian or refining disciples are the lowest level students in the academy. Once they build their foundation, they can become lecturers. Once they form their core formation, they can become assistant lecturers. And once they form their nascent soul, they can become professors. Mo Tiange was stunned. Han Shiji's only a core formation cultivator, but he's already a professor, correct? Ling Yunhe smiled. Only some publicly recognized geniuses who make contributions to the academy will be granted the title of high level. The reason why Han Shiji is already a professor when he's only in the core formation realm is because he created a set of mental cultivation techniques for the Yushan Academy. Upon hearing the reason, Emotienga sighed and said, Yunzhong is indeed full of talented people. Not to mention others, the people she met today were all extraordinary. Black Moon Devil Monarch's divine sense was amazing. Han Shiji was actually such a genius. Yang Qingji, who was silent most of the time at the trade fair, could easily take out so many beast cores, and Ling Yunhe, who was in front of her, had extraordinary strength. Emotienga didn't know whether Yuan Kong, Qing Yunzi, and Yong Ruyu also had their own unique methods. Ling Yunhe's gaze fell on Emotienga. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't need to praise others. Just now, when you fought against Han Shiji, you didn't seem to be at a disadvantage at all. With this kind of strength, you can be considered one of the top experts in Yunzhong. At this point he smiled and said, Sure enough, I didn't misjudge you. Emotienga just smiled after hearing Ling Yunhe's praise. Under the moonlight, the two of them were silent for a while. Emotienga suddenly asked, Fellow Taoist Ling, what's going on with the Carefree Valley you mentioned earlier? Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment, before he regained his composure. With a happy expression he said, Fellow Taoist Qin, are you willing to accept my invitation? Emotienga said vaguely, We'll talk about it later. Ling Yunhe didn't get a definite answer, but he didn't feel disappointed. He quickly regained his composure. His gaze swept around and he said with a smile, Are we going to talk here? Emotienga was stunned. She apologized. It's my fault. If you don't mind, fellow Taoist Ling, why don't you come to my small cave? Ling Yunhe didn't stand on ceremony and nodded happily. That's exactly what I was thinking. Emotienga was a bit speechless. This person really didn't know how to be polite. If it was someone else, even if they immediately agreed, they would at least say a few polite words, right? However, it seemed like he was a magnanimous person, and Emotienga happened to like this kind of person. Talking to this kind of person wasn't very tiring, because he was smart enough, and because he was magnanimous, she didn't need to make wild guesses. This kind of feeling reminded her of Qin Shi, when he was still senior martial brother Qin. Although he had a lot of secrets, he was also smart and magnanimous. She suddenly missed Qin Shi. She wondered if his closed-door meditation was going smoothly. Fellow Taoist Qin? Ling Yunhe, who was about to take a step, saw that Emotienga was still standing in the same place. So he turned around and called out in confusion. Ah! Emotienga regained her train of thought. She patted her forehead and smiled at him. Please. The two of them walked silently until they reached the small cave where Emotienga was temporarily staying. Although the spiritual aura in this cave was ordinary, it was well arranged. Moonstones glittered, making it as bright as day. This time, Emotienga very politely served him a cup of tea for a guest. Ling Yunhe was very satisfied. This meant that their relationship had taken a step closer, right? After drinking the tea, Ling Yunhe spoke again. Fellow Taoist Qin, I don't want to pry into why you provoked Han Shiji, but listen to my advice. You must be careful in the future. This person is narrow-minded and cares a lot about face. If he tripped over you, he'll definitely get it back. He underestimated you this time, but he might not be so lucky next time. Emotienga smiled and nodded. Thank you for reminding me, fellow Taoist Ling. I'll be careful. Ling Yunhe's gaze shifted, and he continued to smile. However, if fellow Taoist Qin is willing to help me, I'll definitely help you solve Han Shiji's problem in the future. Emotienga was stunned, but when she thought of Ling Yunhe's identity, she suddenly understood. Even if Han Shiji had an extraordinary status in Nanzhou, the person in front of her was one of the candidates for the head of Juyin sect, the biggest cultivation group in Yunzhong. He had a great chance of becoming the head of Juyin sect. With his help, she naturally wouldn't have to worry about Han Shiji. She raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, Fellow Taoist Ling, if I agree to go to Carefree Valley with you, what benefits are you willing to give me? She asked directly, but Ling Yunhe was very happy. If fellow Taoist Qin is willing to help, I'll help you with anything you need as long as I can do it. Emotienga stared at him and continued to ask, What if I want to get a complete cultivation technique manual from Wuxia sect? Ling Yunhe was stunned. Cultivation technique manual? Since this matter was already brought up, Mo Tiange simply said, yes. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Ling. I came to Yunzhong this time because I was ordered by my elders to get a cultivation technique manual from Wuxia sect. However, fellow Taoist Ling also knows that who would be willing to give a profound cultivation technique to others? I'm unfamiliar with this place, and I don't have any friendship with Wuxia sect, so it's really a headache for me. Is that so? Ling Yunhe pondered for a while, then glanced at Mo Tiange thoughtfully. Presumably, the cultivation technique fellow Taoist Qin is talking about isn't an ordinary cultivation technique, right? Yes. Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. To be honest, I don't have any confidence in this matter, and think it's most likely impossible. However, this is my elder's order, so I have to do it. First, tell me what cultivation technique fellow Taoist wants. Ling Yunhe thought for a while, then looked at her and said, maybe I really have a way. It's the art of sinew. Mo Tiange slowly said those 3 words, then looked up at Ling Yunhe. I wonder if fellow Taoist Ling has heard of it. The art of sinew, Ling Yunhe muttered as if he was recalling something. All of a sudden, he stared at Mo Tiange with a sharp gaze. The art of sinew cultivated by purine female cultivators. Yes. Mo Tiange's expression was still calm. Several thousand years ago, my ancestor was a cultivator in Yunzhong. He once heard that Wuxia sect had a art of sinew cultivated by female cultivators with purine constitution. Chapter 368. For a while neither of them spoke and fell into silence. Ling Yunhe held his teacup and stared at her for a while. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he finally couldn't help but ask, fellow Taoist Qin, what do you want this technique for? After saying that, he felt it was inappropriate, so he added, if it's not convenient, you don't have to answer. Mo Tiange glanced at him with a faint smile and shook her head. Sorry, it's really not convenient to answer. Ling Yunhe nodded and didn't say anything. He was just asking casually, and didn't expect to get an answer. Who would answer this question? Purine constitution. If a female cultivator with a purine constitution existed in this world, how big of a storm would it set off in Yunzhong? The nascent soul cultivators had already reached the peak of cultivation in the mortal world, so they might not have any thoughts about it. However, the core formation cultivators definitely wouldn't let them go. Even he himself was shaken when he thought of this, and it took him a long time to calm himself down. However, he didn't think of Mo Tiange as the reason. How could a female cultivator, with a purine constitution, wander the world at will? Not to mention to say it out loud so frankly. If he knew that Mo Tiange wasn't the only one who did this, and that Mo Yaoqing also ran amok in Yunzhong thousands of years ago, he would probably be so shocked that his jaw would drop. In a way, Mo Tiange not only inherited Mo Yaoqing's purine constitution, but she also inherited her courage. Ling Yunhe put this thought behind him, and thought carefully. If fellow Taoist Qin is sure that this technique is in Wuxia sect, I can find a way to get it. Mo Tiange's eyes brightened when she got a definite answer. If fellow Taoist Ling is willing to help me, I'll do my best to help Carefree Valley. Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment, then he showed a happy expression. Okay, it's settled then. After that, Ling Yunhe talked about the Carefree Valley without holding anything back, not leaving out any details. Since Mo Tiange didn't agree before, Ling Yunhe naturally left some leeway. Since they formed an alliance this time, he had to be honest about some things. Carefree Valley wasn't simple. It was indeed a blessed place in Yunzhong in ancient times. But now, it was full of evil miasma, so it wasn't easy to enter. There were also some strange demonic beasts. Although they were core formation cultivators, they needed at least 5 or 6 people to enter. This was also the reason why Ling Yunhe wanted to invite her. However, after listening to Ling Yunhe for a while, Mo Tiange realized she actually didn't suffer any losses. This was because Carefree Valley was a secluded place, and Yunzhong's cultivators couldn't go there whenever they wanted. Although the miasma had reappeared, There were still some treasures left behind from the ancient times. As long as he could obtain even one, it would not be a loss. As for the worryless fruit that Ling Yunhe wanted, Emotianga didn't covet it at all. She had the spiritual attraction bead, and did not lack pills. Although the effects of the pills were not as good as the fretless fruit, they were not too far off. If she helped Ling Yunhe obtain the worryless fruit, not only would she not have to worry about the art of Sunu, but she would also have Ling Yunhe to help her deal with Han Shizhi, the enemy she'd inadvertently made. It could be said that as long as she wasn't too unlucky, she would definitely profit from this deal. After a rough agreement, Ling Yunhe made an appointment to talk with her later and left. Emotianga stayed outside for a while. She restored the defensive formation, then entered the virtual sky world. As soon as he entered the virtual sky world, a golden light rushed over. "Master!" It was a tender voice. Emotianga knew it was Feifei without saying. But she also knew that the current Feifei wasn't the Feifei from before. In the past, the one who rushed over was acting coquettishly, but this one was most likely a disaster. Therefore, she took the opportunity to hug it, and threw it across the room. This self-proclaimed divine beast Feifei knew how to enjoy life better than she did, so it insisted on sitting on the praying mat. If she threw it everywhere like before, it would definitely protest. "I'm telling you, if you want clear sky pills, you can't get them anymore. Do you think they're sugar pills? What if you eat them carelessly and cause problems?" Feifei rolled on the praying mat across from her, and raised its head. "Who said I want clear sky pills? I'm not stupid. I haven't finished eating them last time." Emotianga cast a glance at it, and poured herself a cup of tea. In fact, Feifei's awakening wasn't completely without benefits. For example, she didn't need to make tea by herself now. Those two stone sculpture puppets didn't have consciousness, so they couldn't make such good tea. Moreover, she had someone to chat with. Feifei was smart enough to understand everything, and even gave her ideas. Oh, the tea's fragrance was refreshing. A divine beast was indeed a divine beast. It really knew how to enjoy life. "Then what do you want to do? Can't I just say hello?" Feifei blinked its round eyes. It used to be very cute when it did this, but now, Emotianga only felt it was treacherous. She suddenly missed the old Feifei. Although it only knew how to eat and couldn't cook, it was still pleasing to the eye and cute. After thinking for a while, she turned around and asked, "Where's Xiaohua? Why don't you go play with them? What's so fun about it?" Feifei's head fell on the tea table. "One can't talk, and the other is stupid to death. Master, what kind of spiritual beasts did you find?" "Too vicious." Emotianga glared at it. "You didn't know how to talk, and were stupid to death before." "That's the past," Feifei said disdainfully. "When you were a baby, you still needed people to serve you." Emotianga stared at the sky for a while and said helplessly, "Feifei, aren't you a divine beast? Why do you talk like a loafer in the mortal world? Shouldn't divine beasts from the distant past be ignorant of the mortal world, and live in a place like paradise? Even if their temperaments weren't very gentle, they shouldn't be this treacherous, right?" Feifei curled its lips and said, "We used to live together with humans." "Huh." Feifei raised its head and stared at her. "You don't know." Emotianga indeed didn't know. Only a few words were left about how people lived in the distant past era, and what was recorded in ancient books was only a legend. Feifei raised its head and said slowly, "At that time, we spirits and humans lived together. There weren't that many cultivators, and there weren't that many disputes. It was very happy." Yearning slowly appeared in its eyes. That was an era that was also very far away from it. Although it had some memories, it wasn't a spiritual beast from that era after all. "Master," Feifei said after a pause, "I've been thinking for a long time these past few days, and I think there's something wrong with this world." And Emotianga put down the teacup, and found that Feifei's gaze was very serious. It stared at Emotianga and said, "From ancient times until now, spirits and demons have been separated. Although the human world has been a long time, and there must have been great changes, it shouldn't have become like this. I don't remember much, but many things nowadays are very different from ancient times. And even completely opposite. This isn't normal." Emotinga didn't doubt that Feifei had enough wisdom. It had awakened. Although it didn't have the strength of a divine beast, its intelligence wouldn't be reduced. However, she didn't know what to say about this conclusion. She was only a core formation cultivator, and her strength to explore the origin of the world was still too low. Seeing that Emotinga didn't know what to say, Feifei sighed and lowered its head. I know you don't understand. Forget it. Let's talk about it when you advance to the nascent soul realm. At that time, you should understand what I mean. Ever since it advanced, Feifei had always looked sly, but now, Emotinga felt that its expression was full of melancholy. She could understand Feifei's feelings. It inherited its ancestors' memory, but lived in the abandoned human world. So it must feel very lonely. However, this kind of loneliness was something she couldn't do anything about right now. Power and realm. These things even determine the height of one's thoughts. She said, advancing to the nascent soul realm isn't something that can be done in a day or two. If you just feel bored, you can talk to me about it, although I might not necessarily understand. Feifei propped its head on the table and looked at her. It still looked as cute as before, but the feeling it gave off was completely different. After a while it said, although you're not a good master, at least you're a good person. Emotinga glared at it. How am I not a good master? I'll give you whatever I have. Where else can you find a master like me? Why didn't it think about how it advanced? Feifei stretched its limbs, then tilted its head and said, you're talking about these spiritual panaceas? You can't use so many by yourself, and they came from nowhere. If you don't give them to us to eat, you'd be too stingy. Emotinga was speechless. But on second thought, Feifei was right. The reason she was so generous was because she had too many, and it was too easy for her to obtain them. If she was really like those cultivators who obtained some spiritual panaceas with great difficulty, would she be willing to give them to eat? Before she built her foundation, she wasn't even interested in raising spiritual beasts, because she knew she couldn't keep them alive. However, if you didn't have this kind of fated chance, we wouldn't be where we are today. Feifei's gaze passed through the bamboo house and looked at the medicinal field in the distance. You humans are really smart. To open up such an independent space, you need a great divine power that can shatter the void and some wonderful little tricks. Even the outstanding divine beasts like us, the 4 symbols and 5 spirits, can't do it. No wonder God left the human world to you. Emotinga was moved. You said the human world now is very different from ancient times, and God left the human world to us humans. Do you know God's intention? Feifei blinked and tilted its head. Is God something we can reach? Stop asking stupid questions. Asterisk, 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 she was ridiculed by her spiritual beast. Emotinga touched her nose. Then why did you say it's unusual? Because the human world is changing, but some rules shouldn't be changed, Feifei said. God left this world and divided the devil spirit realm, the immortal realm, and the devil realm to leave the human world to humans. But now there are only humans in the human world. So many rules are completely different from before. Rules? What do you mean? It's God's righteousness. Feifei stroked the golden fur on its body. Don't ask me. I can't explain it clearly now. Teach me how to read these words first. I need you humans' ancient books and records to understand the current world. All right. Emotinga also knew that even if Feifei told her, she wouldn't really understand it now. The problem was there such an arrogant spiritual beast? From the beginning to the end, it was ordering its master around. Chapter 369. Since Feifei could speak, its intelligence wasn't lower than that of humans, so Emotinga had nothing to worry about. She gave it a lot of ancient books to study. As for herself, she was preparing to go out. Since she agreed to help Ling Yunhe, she had to do her best. She wasn't afraid of taking risks, but she always cherished her life. Ling Yunhe was a practical person. Within a few days, he brought her some necessities for this trip to Carefree Valley, as well as some information about Carefree Valley. Carefree Valley was a secret place. Few people in Yunzhong knew its exact location, but he told her the map of Carefree Valley and the situation there so frankly. His behavior was quite pleasing to Emotienga. Because of this, she was more willing to go on this trip. Working with people she liked, even if it was dangerous, made her feel carefree. After familiarizing herself with these situations, another half a month passed. The companions that Ling Yunhe mentioned finally gathered together and sent a letter to invite her over. Leaving her temporary cave, she went straight to the Ling clan's mansion at the top of Whitestone Mountain, according to Ling Yunhe. The Ling clan's mansion was located at the top of Whitestone Mountain, occupying the best spirit veins in Sky Snow City. Emotienga walked up the mountainside without any obstructions. When she reached the top, she couldn't help but stop and praise it. If Sky Snow City was a city of white snow, then the Ling clan's mansion was an ice palace. It occupied an area of several hundred square kilometers. Towering pavilions stretched as far as the eye could see, and all of them were made of glittering and translucent white stone. This white stone was different from the white stone of other buildings in Sky Snow City. It was slightly transparent, and just by looking at it, one could feel a trace of cold air coming from it. There was indeed air on it, but it was spiritual aura. Emotienga could see that this Ling clan's mansion was probably built using the best quality white stones from Baishir Mountain. Its spirit-gathering effect wasn't inferior to that of ordinary spirit-gathering formations. It was countless times better than the so-called spirit stone houses in Sky Snow City. This Ling clan was indeed a famous clan. Before she reached the door, a low-level cultivator came to greet her. "Senior, you're here. This way, please." Emotienga stared at him and was surprised. "Aren't you Xiaoshan?" This person was the low-level cultivator who guided her when she rented the cave. "Senior, you still remember me?" Xiaoshan was pleasantly surprised. Then, he scratched his head and smiled shyly. "Junior knows Senior, so second uncle specially asked Junior to run errands and pick you up." "Oh, I see." Emotienga nodded, then followed him into Ling clan's mansion. "Is everyone else here?" she asked casually. Xiaoshan said as he led the way. "Senior, are you talking about second uncle's friends?" "We're all here. We're just waiting for you. Is that so?" Emotienga asked casually. "Who are those people?" Xiaoshan looked embarrassed and said, Senior, you should wait for my second uncle to introduce you. I don't have the qualifications to meet these seniors. He was only an insignificant aura refining cultivator, not some genius disciple. Normally, he was just a runner in the clan. How could he have the qualifications to receive core formation cultivators? Letting him pick up Emotienga today was already an exception. Emotienga didn't mind. She nodded casually and followed Xiaoshan through the complicated pavilions. After a while, they finally arrived in front of a small independent building. Before the two of them could approach, 4 foundation building female cultivators came to greet them. They asked respectfully, "Is Senior Qinwei here?" Xiaoshan had finished his task, so he stood respectfully to the side. Emotienga looked at the 4 foundation building female cultivators and said neither hurriedly nor slowly, "I'm Qinwei." Upon hearing her affirmative answer, the 4 foundation building female cultivators immediately stepped aside and bowed. "Greetings to Senior Qin. My master ordered us to come and welcome Senior." If she was an ordinary person, she would have been fooled by Ling Yunhe's ostentation. These 4 female cultivators were beautiful, graceful, and their cultivation levels weren't bad, but they were trained to be so obedient. Coming to welcome a guest like this not only didn't neglect the guest, but also made people feel the master was extraordinary. This move was indeed brilliant. Unfortunately, Emotienga was used to this. Although the 16 maids by Lord Taoist Jinghe's side had a lot of small problems, in terms of beauty and temperament, they were much better than these 2 female cultivators. In front of outsiders, they were also well-mannered, gentle, and elegant. It had to be said that although Ling Yunhe knew how to enjoy himself, he was still a junior in the end, and couldn't compare to an old monster like Lord Taoist Jinghe. Therefore, she just glanced at the 4 people faintly and nodded. That being the case, lead the way. The spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator inadvertently spread out, so the 4 foundation building female cultivators didn't dare to neglect her. 2 of them walked in front, and the other 2 followed behind, respectfully inviting her into the building. As soon as she stepped into the small building, someone immediately came to greet her with a smile. "Fellow Taoist Qin, you're here." Mo Tiange looked up and saw that the person who greeted her was Ling Yunhe. At this moment, Ling Yunhe was even more graceful than he had been in the past few days. The first time she saw him, he looked like a downtrodden cultivator. The second time she saw him, he was neatly dressed and had an imposing appearance. This time, however, he looked refreshed and elegant. Mo Tiange couldn't help but imagine what he would look like the next time she saw him. She let her imagination run wild, but on the surface, she still politely returned Ling Yunhe's greeting. "Fellow Taoist Ling, I came as promised. May I know what's next?" "Oh." Ling Yunhe immediately took over the conversation. "Fellow Taoist Qin, these are my friends. I'll introduce them to you first." Mo Tiange followed his line of sight and saw 4 cultivators sitting in the hall. She couldn't help but be stunned. These 4 cultivators were all in the core formation realm. 2 were in the middle stage, and the other 2 were in the early stage, just like Ling Yunhe said. However, what surprised her was that there was actually an acquaintance among them. It was the devil cultivator Yang Qingji, whom she met at the tea house in Sky Snow City that day. "This is my good friend of many years. His surname is Tian, and his name is Jiqian. He's a cultivator from 5 Elements Valley who specializes in the Tao of formations and rarely goes out." Ling Yunhe pointed at a middle-stage core formation cultivator and introduced him to Mo Tiange. The cultivator stood up and saluted Mo Tiange. "I'm Tian Jiqian. Greetings to fellow Taoist Qin." Mo Tiange returned his salute with a smile. "Fellow Taoist Tian." Judging from Tian Jiqian's appearance, he looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. He looked gentle and delicate, and his whole body was clean and tidy. His clothes were very simple. If it wasn't for the momentum he exuded, she wouldn't be able to guess that this young man, with a harmless smile on his face, was a middle-stage core formation cultivator. Mo Tiange noticed that his fingers were especially fair and clean, and his nails were trimmed just right. Apparently, he studied formations a lot on a daily basis. Fiddling with formation props was a delicate job, and all formation masters had very nimble fingers. This fellow Taoist's name is Tiancan. He's an individual cultivator. Ling Yunhe pointed at another middle-stage core formation cultivator and introduced him. Mo Tiange looked at him. This was a very thin and weak man dressed in black. His face was covered with a black scarf, and even his hands were wrapped in black cloth. He was also wearing a conical bamboo hat. His dressing was very similar to Yang Qingji's, but he didn't have the devil aura on his body. "Fellow Taoist Tiancan." She greeted this person with a smile. This person just slightly opened his eyes, nodded at her, and cupped his hands slightly as a greeting. Then he closed his eyes and lowered his head again, looking like he didn't want to talk to her. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe smiled at Mo Tiange and said, "This fellow Taoist Tiancan doesn't like to talk. Fellow Taoist Qin, please don't take offense." Mo Tiange nodded to show she understood, then looked at the next person. "This is Brother Yang. His name is Qingji, and he's from Northern Qilin Nation. He's the direct disciple of Guifang Devil Monarch. His devil art is very outstanding, and ordinary middle-stage core formation cultivators aren't his match." "Guifang Devil Monarch?" Mo Tiange asked softly. Ling Yunhe slapped his forehead, shook his head and said with a smile, "I forgot. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't from Yunzhong, so you don't know these things. Guifang Devil Monarch is one of the 3 great devil monarchs in Yunzhong. He advanced to the late stage of the nascent soul realm several hundred years ago, and his name shook Yunzhong. He rarely has a match. This Brother Yang is his only direct disciple." Although Mo Tiange hadn't heard of the 3 great devil monarchs, since Ling Yunhe said he rarely had a match in Yunzhong, and his cultivation level was in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, he should be someone like Master Song Feng, right? In that case, as his only direct disciple, Yang Qingji's identity was quite extraordinary. It was no wonder he didn't introduce his background at the tea table that day. Presumably in Yunzhong, the 3 words Yang Qingji had already explained his identity. "Fellow Taoist Yang, we meet again." She curled up the corners of her mouth and saluted Yang Qingji. The two of them had dealt with each other and exchanged goods, so Yang Qingji was a bit more polite than last time. He stood up and saluted back. Fellow Taoist Qin. Upon seeing this, Ling Yunhe was a bit surprised. You've already met? Mo Tiange smiled and said. We met once at the tea table, but at that time, I didn't know fellow Taoist Yang's identity was extraordinary. Right after she finished speaking, Yang Qingji said with a wooden expression, I'm just an ordinary devil cultivator. How could I be extraordinary? Fellow Taoist Qin doesn't need to praise me. His words were really blunt. If people who didn't know him heard it, they might think he was arrogant and difficult to get along with. However, Mo Tiange could hear that he didn't want others to treat her differently because of her master's name, which gave her a better impression of him. She didn't get angry and apologized to Yang Qingji. I made a slip of the tongue. Fellow Taoist Yang, please don't take offense. Although she apologized, her tone was very indifferent and didn't seem to have any intention of flattering him. Upon hearing this, Yang Qingji politely saluted her again. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to be so polite. The interaction between the two of them was witnessed by everyone else. Astonishment flashed in Ling Yunhe's eyes, but he didn't say anything. He then introduced the last person to Mo Tiange. Fellow Taoist Qin, this is my clan brother Ling Yunfei. This person's age was similar to Ling Yunhe's, and their faces were indeed a bit similar. However, he looked a bit arrogant and unruly like a teenager, lacking a bit of maturity. As soon as Mo Tiange saw him, she knew he was a proud and arrogant descendant of an aristocratic family. Fortunately, Ling Yunfei was still polite to her. He stood up and saluted her. Fellow Taoist Qin, I've heard a lot about you. Fellow Taoist Yunfei is too polite. Where did I get my name? Mo Tiange said modestly and saluted him back. Ling Yunfei stared at her without blinking. These days, I've heard from my second brother that fellow Taoist Qin has a profound cultivation level and a steady character. What's rare is that you're also very young and beautiful. I didn't believe him, but now that I've seen you, I know what he said is true. These words were indeed praising her. But Ling Yunfei's gaze was a bit too passionate. Mo Tiange couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. In the past, when she was still an aura refining or foundation building cultivator, how could other cultivators praise her like this? Now she was already in the core formation realm. Among core formation cultivators, female cultivators were really rare, so she seemed to stand out from the crowd. That's enough, Ling Yunhe promptly said. Let's get to know each other. From now on, we'll be companions on this trip to Carefree Valley. Chapter 370. The six people saluted each other and sat down. Mo Tiange found that the six of them had one thing in common. They all looked very young. Tian Jiqian, who looked the oldest, was only about 30 years old, while the others looked like they were in their early 20s. This wasn't strange. Ling Yunhe was only about 100 years old, and he was a disciple of a famous sect. Juyin sect's outstanding disciple caught his attention, so he wouldn't be too inferior. Ling Yunhe sat in the host's seat and said, Everyone, I'm the initiator of this trip to Carefree Valley, so I probably know more about Carefree Valley than you do. So, I'll be the leader of this trip. Do you have any objections? His tone was calm, and his speech was neither fast nor slow. He didn't seem overbearing, but he was full of confidence. Mo Tiange thought it was no wonder Ling Yunhe was listed as a candidate for the head of Juyin sect. Not only was his cultivation level outstanding, but his behavior was also outstanding. What was rare was that he acted calmly, but also seemed magnanimous. He felt that his seat should be his, so he didn't refuse politely. However, she didn't know this person's temperament. If he didn't have evil intentions, they could be friends. Tian Jiqian smiled and said, Of course. This trip is for Brother Ling, so of course Brother Ling will be the leader. Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. He just sat in his seat, spinning the teacup in his hand, and looking up from time to time. Of course, he didn't have any objections. This was Ling Yunhe's business, and also the Ling family's business. Ling Yunhe once said that because of the conflict between the sect and the family's interests, it wasn't convenient for him to invite acquaintances. However, he invited Ling Yunfei, which showed that Ling Yunfei was someone he could really trust. Ling Yunhe's gaze fell on the other three people. Yang Qingji said, "I have no objections." Mo Tiange smiled faintly, which could be considered an answer. The black-masked Tianqian just opened his eyes slightly then closed them again. Since no one has any objections, this matter is settled. Ling Yunhe paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the 5 people seated before he slowly said, "I'm sure all of you know what kind of place the Carefree Valley is. With our strength, it won't be difficult for us to escape unscathed after we enter. However, if we don't work together, it's very possible that we'll perish in the Carefree Valley. Hence, I hope that all of you can guarantee that once we enter the Carefree Valley, all of you will listen to my instructions." At this point he smiled and added, "I can also guarantee that I will put your lives first." Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei nodded in agreement, but Tianqian and Mo Tiange didn't say anything. Only Yang Qingji's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "As long as fellow Taoist Ling doesn't break his promise, there will naturally be no problem." Ling Yunhe nodded and smiled. "As for whether or not we can find the carefree fruit, it all depends on our luck. Even if I can't find it, I will still abide by our previous agreement. I will fulfill all the conditions that I promised everyone. I trust Brother Ling's character," Tian Jiqian said first. The others didn't have any objections. Mo Tiange wondered what kind of price Ling Yunhe paid to invite these people. If she was alone, although she didn't need any treasures or spirit stones, those 2 things wouldn't be easy to do. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe said, "That being the case, let's discuss the plan for this trip." Although it was called a discussion, in fact he was the only one talking. Ling Yunfei occasionally interjected, and the others just asked some questions that interested them. Ling Yunhe was very well prepared. He had prepared the route, talismans, medicinal pills, and so on. He told everyone the rough route, and how to deal with some matters. After that, he distributed some necessary small items to them. Mo Tiange looked around. There were some detoxification medicinal pills, sound-transmitting talismans, protective talismans, and the map that Ling Yunhe had prepared for each of them. Mo Tiange felt a little relieved. Seeing that Ling Yunhe handled things in an orderly manner, this trip should be safe. After spending about 2 hours explaining the plan, Ling Yunhe asked, "Does anyone have any questions?" Everyone shook their heads. He even considered some unexpected situations, so he couldn't think of anything to ask now. As for the rest, they could only act according to the circumstances. That being the case, let's determine the time of departure. Do you have anything else to deal with? After Ling Yunhe asked, Tianqian, who hadn't spoken since the beginning, opened his eyes and said, "I still have something to do. I need 2 days." Mo Tiange frowned slightly. This Tiansan's voice was hoarse like a sharp thorn, which was very uncomfortable to listen to. Ling Yunhe nodded slightly and asked, "What about the other fellow Taoists? If you have something to deal with, please deal with it quickly. We don't have much time left." Mo Tiange had already inquired about it. The Jiuyan sect's head selection had been prepared for more than a year, and the final day would be in 2 months. Because of the internal strife in the Ling clan, Ling Yunhe was confirmed to be the candidate several months ago. After returning from Carefree Valley, he had to adjust his condition, so he really didn't have much time left. The others shook their heads. There was no need to mention Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei. Yang Qingji had been in Sky Snow City for several days, so he must have finished his business. Mo Tiange didn't have anything important to do now, so she could leave at any time. "Then we'll leave in 3 days. Is there any problem?" This time, even Tianqian shook his head. Seeing that no one had any objections, Ling Yunhe said, "Good." 3 days later, at the same time, let's gather here. What do you think? Everyone agreed. Then they left. Tian Jiqian, Yang Qingji, and the others stayed in the Ling mansion. Only Mo Tiange and Tianqian left the Ling mansion one after another. Just as she was about to return to her cave to continue meditating, a fierce momentum suddenly swept from behind. Mo Tiange leaned to one side, and the fierce momentum brushed past. A white stone not far from her made a loud boom sound and shattered into powder. At that moment, Emotinga flipped her hand, and the heaven and earth fan appeared in her hand. She waved it lightly to block the next spiritual aura attack. Like a flash of lightning, she floated several hundred feet away in an instant. The attacker exclaimed in surprise. Although the art of teleportation could be said to be one of the most basic spells for core formation cultivators, there were still differences in skill. Ordinary teleportation could only cover a distance of about 100 feet, and the distance Emotinga teleported to was already considered extremely far. But in the next moment, the attacker immediately chased after her and ruthlessly attacked her with another spiritual aura attack. This person's attack technique was very simple. He didn't use magic weapons or any fancy tricks. He just used all the spiritual aura in his body to meet force with force. Emotinga didn't even have time to breathe a sigh of relief when she felt the fierce momentum pressing down on her again. She was a bit annoyed. She didn't provoke anyone, so why was this person so relentless? She no longer held back. She waved the white silk handkerchief to protect herself. Then she fumbled in her chinkuan bag and took out the spirit cloud's rui, smashing it towards the attacker. Boom! This loud noise was even louder than the previous one. The attacker quickly retreated, but he still didn't have time to get out of the attack range. With a muffled groan, he was hit by the spiritual aura explosion triggered by the spirit cloud's rui and fell down. But he quickly steadied himself. He raised his hand, and a small shield appeared in front of him. This shield was obviously a high-grade magic weapon. It emitted a sparkling blue light and instantly protected him. Emotinga withdrew the spirit cloud's rui and didn't follow up with another attack. Instead, she stared at the person in front of her and asked with a frown, "Fellow Taoist Tiancan, what's the meaning of this?" The person who attacked her from behind was Tiancan, who was having a gathering with them just now. When the spiritual aura explosion triggered by the spirit cloud's rui stabilized, Tiancan waved his hand and removed the shield. He stared at Emotinga. His fierce momentum gradually disappeared. He cupped his hands and saluted her, then said in a harsh voice, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you're very skillful." Upon hearing this, Emotinga understood that she was being tested. Although Tiansan's attack was fierce, he didn't intend to kill her, so he didn't use his magic weapon. But this person was obviously a martial cultivator. Such fierce aura definitely couldn't be possessed by other cultivators. Her companions this time were really interesting. Shi Ling Yunhe and Ling Yunfei were Taoist law cultivators. Tian Jiqian was also a Taoist law cultivator, but he was a formation master. Yang Qingji was a devil cultivator, and Tiancan was a martial cultivator. Emotinga said, "Fellow Taoist Tiancan, you didn't use your magic weapon, but you fought me with your aura alone. Your means are extraordinary." Tiancan was wrapped in black clothes and wore a bamboo hat on his head. Only a pair of half-closed eyes could be seen on his body, and no expression could be seen on his face. He looked at Emotinga and said flatly, "I'm a martial cultivator. Why would I need a magic weapon in a fight of magical powers? A loss is a loss. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to give me face." Although what he said was reasonable, he didn't use his weapon, so he didn't use his full strength. Of course, Emotinga also didn't use her full strength, so she just said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Tiancan, do you have anything else to say? If not, I'll take my leave first." Tiancan was stunned. Seeing that she wasn't interested in him, he had no choice but to leave. "I'm going to take care of my business. Fellow Taoist Qin, we'll meet again." Emotinga cupped her hands at him and left without saying anything. When she was far away, Tiancan sighed, chose the path down the mountain and walked away. At that moment Emotinga stopped. She turned around and stared at Tiansan's back with a frown, lost in thought. What's this Tiansan's background? Did he suddenly test her out of curiosity, or did he have some other intentions? In terms of fights of magical powers, she had a lot of treasures now, so she wasn't afraid of him. However, on this trip to Carefree Valley, he was her companion. If he had any ulterior motives, wouldn't it be dangerous? Fellow Taoist Qin. Just as she was thinking, someone called her from behind. Emotinga turned around and saw Ling Yunhe standing not far from her. He looked pensive as he stared at the scene of devastation not far from them. "Fellow Taoist Ling?" Ling Yunhe shifted his gaze, smiled at her, and pointed at the place where they fought just now. "Fellow Taoists, you're very skillful. White spirit stones are very hard, but they were unexpectedly damaged by you." Tiansan's strike turned a huge white stone into powder, and Emo Tianga's spirit cloud's Rui also blasted a huge hole in the ground. Emo Tianga smiled and said apologetically, "I'm really sorry. I damaged this place." "Hey!" Ling Yunhe waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, why are you so polite? I'm not such a petty person. I'm just amazed by your amazing divine powers." "Fellow Taoist Ling, you flatter me." Emo Tianga didn't really take it seriously. But since she was in someone else's territory, she still had to be polite. She asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you chase after me?" Ling Yunhe shook his head and said with a smile, "I just heard some noise and came out to take a look. If fellow Taoist Qin wants to go back and rest, I won't disturb you." Emo Tianga smiled and said, "Since that's the case, I'll take my leave first." Chapter 371. Emo Tianga didn't notice that after she left, Ling Yunhe stared at the traces left by the two of them in silence. After a long time, he shook his head and muttered, "Not simple." Then he slowly walked back to the Ling family's mansion with his hands behind his back. His brows were tightly knitted, but it was hard to tell whether he was happy or worried. 3 days later, the 6 people gathered at the Ling family's mansion again. This time, Ling Yunhe didn't put on airs and directly invited them in. After confirming that there were no mistakes, the 6 people turned into flight lights and disappeared into the sky. Carefree Valley was located at the border between Eastern Tang and Northern Lin Kingdom. Sky Snow City was located in the north of Eastern Tang Country. It was only 6 to 7 days' journey from Northern Lin Country. The cultivation of the 6 of them wasn't bad. Even the 2 early-stage core formation cultivators had many spirit artifacts on them, and their strength was extraordinary. The 6 people sped up. 5 days later, they arrived at Mount Jialing, where Carefree Valley was located. Mount Jialing was a mountain range at the border between Eastern Tang and Northern Lin Kingdom. It stretched for hundreds of miles and towered into the clouds. To the southeast of the mountain was Eastern Tang's Jialing town, and to the north was Northern Lin Kingdom's famous Devil's Domain, Star Descent City. Mount Jialing was just a name in Eastern Tang, but people in Northern Lin Kingdom were used to calling it Star Descent Mountain. Carefree Valley was hidden in this mountain. 6 flight lights landed on an uninhabited peak of Mount Jialing. It was Emo Tianga's group of 6. "Is this the place?" Tian Jiqian asked in a very surprised tone. Emo Tianga looked around and saw that this peak was bare except for some stones. There wasn't even a trace of spiritual aura. It really didn't look like a paradise from the distant past era. No wonder Tian Jiqian was so surprised. Ling Yunhe took out his map and confirmed, "Yes, this is the place." Emo Tianga also took out her own map. The entrance to Carefree Valley was near here, but there wasn't a trace of spiritual aura or formation around. How could they enter? The 5 people's gazes were fixed on Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe calmly took out something from his Qinquan bag. "Soul restraining bead." Ling Yunfei blurted out in surprise. Emo Tianga stared at him with rapt attention. She saw that the Lingyan was holding a huge round bead in his hand. The bead emitted a faint light, and the surface of the bead was undulating like water ripples. She could confirm that this bead was a high-ranked treasure. Ling Yunfei called it the God-restraining bead. Could it be used to break seals? Ling Yunfei's expression changed indeterminately. He looked at Ling Yunhe and hesitated over and over again. In the end, he still asked, "Second brother, where did you get this God-restraining pearl?" As they walked among them, they were surrounded by jagged rocks and towering peaks that looked like ferocious beasts. The whole mountain was full of rocks, and they couldn't even find a complete path. Ling Yunhe, on the other hand, walked through the rocks with ease. When they entered the depths of the rocks, there were only rocks and yellow soil at first, but gradually, there were a few traces of green. In the end, Ling Yunhe stopped in front of an ancient tree. This ancient tree was dozens of feet tall. Although it didn't have many green leaves, its branches and vines were intertwined, covering the sky and the earth. It stood alone among the rocks, squeezed to the point where there was only a little living space. However, its branches and leaves covered the land within a radius of 300 meters. Brother Ling, this is? Tian Jiqian asked doubtfully when he saw Ling Yunhe stopped. Ling Yunhe didn't answer. Instead, he raised the soul-restricting pearl in his hand, made a hand seal, and poured spiritual aura into the pearl. With the input of spiritual aura, the ripple-like light around the soul-restricting pearl fluctuated more and more violently, and the hazy light became brighter and brighter. Suddenly Ling Yunhe shouted. The soul-restricting pearl suddenly burst into a dazzling light and shot towards the ancient tree. Buzz! A dull sound echoed in the six people's ears. This sound wasn't harsh, but it was too deep, as if it directly hit their eardrums and knocked on the depths of their brains. Everyone's faces showed unbearable expressions. Although they were all powerful core formation cultivators, who could easily endure a fight of magical powers, even if they were seriously injured, they were helpless in the face of this kind of sound. This was a human body's weakness. As long as they were still human and hadn't ascended, they couldn't get rid of it. Emotinga suddenly thought of something. Although she also felt this sound was very irritating, she didn't feel very uncomfortable. Maybe it was because she practiced the soul-refining art? If that was the case, couldn't she rely on her powerful divine sense to make similar magic weapons to put her opponent in a passive position? This thought flashed in her mind. Soon Ling Yunhe put away the soul-restricting pearl and said, "Everyone, let's go in." Emotinga regained her composure and saw faint spiritual aura fluctuations coming from the ancient tree. Brother Ling, how do we go in? Tian Jiqian looked at the ancient tree with a blank expression. Although this tree obviously had some mysteries because it used the soul-restricting pearl, he couldn't see an entrance. Ling Yunhe smiled. "Everyone, please follow me." He shook his sleeves and flew to the ancient tree. Seeing this, everyone followed suit. Emotinga stopped on a branch of the ancient tree. She looked down and suddenly realized something. There was a hole on the branch of the ancient tree. It was just that the hole wasn't big, and the spiritual aura fluctuations inside were very obscure, so they didn't notice it at all. Ling Yunhe didn't say anything. His body emitted a protective spiritual light, and he jumped down. The other 5 people immediately followed Ling Yunfei, followed by Tian Jiqian and Yang Qingji. Emotinga glanced at Tiancan, then used the art of primordial origin to form a protective spiritual aura shield around her. She also jumped down. In the darkness, she heard the whistling sound of the wind. She kept falling down. Emotinga released her divine sense and immediately frowned. Sure enough, the restriction here also had a suppressive effect on divine sense. As long as it was an ancient land, most of the restrictions left behind by the cultivators would suppress one's divine sense, so she wasn't too surprised. In addition, the spiritual aura here was indeed chaotic. There seemed to be many kinds of restrictions intertwined with each other, and there was also a strange, filthy aura, which was quite complicated. Even weaker core formation cultivators might not be able to withstand this place. The various auras here were too chaotic, which could easily destroy the balance of a cultivator's body and corrode his meridians. Presumably, Ling Yunhe brought the soul-restraining bead with this in mind. With this bead restraining the spiritual aura, it could ensure that the early-stage core formation cultivators, among them, could also enter smoothly. With this thought in mind, Emotinga secretly took out the 8 trigrams diagram from her Qianquan bag and put it in her sleeve. This caused the spiritual qi around her to become much gentler. After a while, the glimmer of the soul-restraining bead stopped. Then Emotinga also stepped on the ground. When Tiancan also landed, the 6 of them had already jumped down. Everyone. Ling Yunhe turned around and faced everyone. We've already discussed what to do on this trip. Once we get out of here, we'll arrive at the Carefree Valley. I'll emphasize one more thing. You'd better not be more than 300 meters away from me. Without the soul-restraining bead, even if we're already in the core formation realm, our cultivation levels will still be suppressed by the chaotic auras in the Carefree Valley. If we encounter one or two monsters, we'll be in danger. Everyone nodded. When they came down just now, they already felt this place wasn't simple. The spiritual aura was so chaotic, and there was also devil aura and filthy aura. In this kind of environment, even if they had great divine abilities, they'd be lucky if they could display half of their power. Okay, let's continue. Ling Yunhe said, then turned around to explore the way. At that moment, Emo Tiange felt the glimmer above her head dimmed. The spiritual aura changed slightly, and the entrance to the ancient tree above her disappeared. Ling Yunfei looked up and felt a bit uneasy. Second brother, must we use the soul restraining bead to open this entrance? Ling Yunhe put the soul restraining bead into his robe. While leading the way, he said, "That's not the case. In fact, this isn't the only entrance to the Carefree Valley. It's just that the other entrances are very dangerous. They either have monsters or strange auras. Only here, the restriction is relatively weak. It'll be fine as long as we break it." Why did this restriction close automatically? This question made Ling Yunhe sigh. The restriction techniques of the distant past era were much more brilliant than the ones we have today. The Carefree Valley was a paradise in the distant past era, so there must have been people with great divine abilities cultivating here. Therefore, these restrictions must have been left behind by cultivators whose realms were much higher than ours. The restrictions in the cultivation world today can't compare to the profundities of their divine abilities. Once Ling Yunhe finished speaking, a light appeared in front of them. They walked towards the light, passed through the rocks and soil, and suddenly saw the light. Chapter 372. Once they left the cave, spiritual aura and other messy auras rushed toward them. Emo Tiange looked around. She was surrounded by overgrown weeds and tangled vines. The air was filled with miasma, and the sky was dim. This Carefree Valley didn't seem special, but the messy auras made everyone frown. For cultivators, miasma was only a bit troublesome, because they needed to protect their bodies with spiritual aura at all times. The worst thing was that it was mixed with filthy aura. Filthy aura was a kind of special aura that existed in the cultivation world. No one knew how it was produced, but this kind of filthy aura could indeed be found in some places. It could erode magic weapons and bodies, deprive magic weapons of spiritual aura, and cause living things to lose their vitality and die. The meaning of its existence seemed to be destruction. Cultivators in this world all avoided it like snakes and scorpions, whether they were Taoist or Buddhist cultivators, Confucian or devil cultivators. However, the spiritual aura in this Carefree Valley was indeed very rich. Emo Tiange sensed her surroundings and thought to herself, this place was called a paradise in ancient times, and it really wasn't just for show. If it weren't for the devil aura, miasma, and filthy aura, the spiritual aura here would be denser than the spiritual aura inside her virtual sky world. Unfortunately, for the cultivators of today, it was impossible for them to expel the chaotic qi outside. They could only absorb the spiritual qi in this place. Thus, this paradise could only become a dangerous place. Everyone. Ling Yunhe was about to speak, but he suddenly frowned. The crescent-shaped jade knife appeared in his hand, and he made a defensive posture. At that moment, everyone except Ling Yunfei was on high alert. Huh. Ling Yunfei stared at them blankly, somewhat at a loss. There's a change in the situation. Ling Yunhe shouted and waved the jade knife in his hand, which shone like a silver moon. After Ling Yunhe finished speaking, Ling Yunfei finally realized that something was surging towards them like a tidal wave. He hurriedly shook his sleeves and two flying swords, one big and one small, flew out of his body. Emo Tiange's frown deepened. Among the 6 people, her divine sense was the most powerful. Although it was suppressed by the restrictions here, she could still clearly sense the situation around her. The thing that was rushing towards them was definitely not an ordinary spiritual object. It carried a heavy aura of filth. What kind of strange thing was that? The filthy qi was meant for destruction. If it was a living creature, how could it still be alive after being infected by it? Soon more and more people in the group of 6 had their expressions change. They were all outstanding core formation cultivators. Even if their divine senses were a bit inferior to Emo Tiange's, It wouldn't be by much. Fellow Taoists. Ling Yunhe cast a meaningful glance at Mo Tiange and said, "It seems the situation in Carefree Valley has changed. Everyone should be careful." There was no need for him to remind them. Everyone was ready to fight. Among them, which one of them hadn't experienced countless hardships and dangers? Even Ling Yunfei, who looked the most immature, had a solemn expression on his face at this moment. 2 flying swords circled around his body as a precaution. As those things came closer and closer, everyone's expressions became more and more serious. They had already discovered that there were definitely over 100 monsters rushing towards them, and each of them had strength exceeding stage 4. With a buzzing sound, the jade knife in Ling Yunhe's hand flew up first and fiercely slashed at the grass. Meow! A huge lynx rolled to the side with blood oozing out of its lower abdomen and cried out in pain. Meow! Meow! Immediately afterward, many lynx leaped over the grass and rushed towards them. "These are monsters!" Yang Qingji shouted. He spread his arm, and a black banner appeared in his hand. The banner was embroidered with a ferocious ghost bearing its fangs. This banner was surging with devil aura, so it should be his natal magic weapon. The other people also noticed that these lynx's eyes were red and glowing, and their bodies were shrouded in black aura. They looked very frightening. Obviously, they weren't ordinary spiritual objects, nor were they monsters. They were mutated monsters. Brother Tian, retreat. Yunfei, stay in the middle and coordinate. Fellow Taoist Yang, fellow Taoist Qin, and fellow Taoist Tiancan. Each of us will take a direction. Ling Yunhe immediately made a decision. The other 5 people didn't hesitate, and immediately stood in the positions he said. Although Tian Jiqian was in the middle stage of the core formation realm, he was a cultivator from 5 Elements Valley, and could be considered a formation master. So he was a bit weaker than ordinary cultivators in fights of magical powers. As for Ling Yunfei, he was the most immature among the people present, and wasn't as steady as the other 3. Letting the 2 of them stand in the back was indeed a more appropriate arrangement. However, Mo Tiange couldn't help but think that among the 5 people, Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei were Ling Yunhe's good friends and younger brothers. Letting them stand in the middle, could it be considered that he was deliberately holding back his strength in case they turned against each other? If so, Ling Yunhe could be considered cunning. If not, why did he choose Tian Jiqian, a formation master, and Ling Yunfei, a somewhat immature brother, as helpers while inviting Yang Qingji, Tiancan and her, 3 people who were both good at fighting and decisive, to go with him? Wasn't he afraid that they would be at a disadvantage if they turned against each other? In her opinion, Tian Jiqian definitely couldn't defeat her or Tiancan, and Ling Yunfei and Yang Qingji were also incomparable. Mo Tiange couldn't think of an answer to this question, so she shook her head and threw it to the back of her mind, focusing on fighting the enemies. After taking their positions, the 6 people began to kill the hundreds of demon cats, surging towards them in an orderly manner. After Ling Yunhe's crescent moon jade knife left his hand, it flew up and down. Under his control, it immediately opened a bloody path in the crowd of demon cats. But when these demon cats smelled the blood, they became even more excited and pounced on Mo Tiange, as if they didn't care about their lives. Mo Tiange frowned. Instead of taking out her heaven and earth fan, she took out Lord Daoist Jinghe's magic weapon, the flying sword, and also controlled the flying sword to kill the demon cats. As soon as Yang Qingji unfolded his ghost face banner, he heard what seemed to be the screams of ferocious ghosts. His devil aura swept towards the demon cats. Whenever his devil aura touched a demon cat, it immediately let out a sharp cry. Soon, they stopped breathing as if their vitality had been sucked out. Tiancan held a claw in each of his hands. Whenever a demon cat approached him, it would be cut down by his sharp claws. Of the 2 flying swords beside Ling Yunfei, the smaller one kept circling him, while the bigger one flew out from time to kill several demon cats. Only Tian Jiqian held a jade plate in his hand, paying attention to the battle in front of him. Mo Tiange glanced at the jade plate, and saw the 5 elements, yin, yang, and 8 trigrams carved on it. It seemed to be a magic weapon related to formations. The cultivation levels of these demon cats weren't high, but they weren't low either. On average, they were a bit stronger than 4th-ranked demonic beasts, but a bit weaker than 5th-ranked demonic beasts. Occasionally, a few demon cats appeared. Although they were comparable to 5th-ranked demonic beasts, they were all experienced core formation cultivators, so they couldn't pose a threat and were quickly killed. Soon, more than half of the hundreds of demon cats were dead or injured, and the smell of blood in the air became stronger and stronger. Ling Yunhe felt something was wrong, so he frowned and pondered. All of a sudden he thought of something. He immediately withdrew the crescent moon jade knife, took out the soul-restraining bead from his robe, and shouted, "Yunfei, go! Everyone be careful! After these demons die, the filthy aura will drift away, and the filthy aura around us is getting thicker and thicker." Everyone was shocked to hear that. After sensing for a while, they realized what Ling Yunhe said was right. The filthy aura had almost surrounded them. "Second brother, what should we do?" Ling Yunfei took over Ling Yunhe's position and blocked one direction, while Ling Yunhe retreated to the center. "We'll fight and retreat at the same time," Ling Yunhe said. "Fellow Taoist Qin, you and Yunfei will lead Brother Tian and lead the way. Fellow Taoist Tian can fellow Taoist Yang, please bring up the rear. I'll be in the middle of you, and use the soul-restraining bead to restrain the aura and restrictions around us." The other 5 people didn't say anything. They quickly adjusted their positions, and did as Ling Yunhe said. Although there were many demon cats, they weren't difficult to deal with. The worst thing was that after they killed the demon cats, the filthy aura on their bodies would spread out and surround them. Therefore, everyone quickly judged the situation. They couldn't kill the demon cats, so they could only repel them. This brought about some difficulties in carrying out their plan. After these demon cats smelled the smell of blood, they became extremely ferocious and charged forward without any regard for their lives. Although they were slightly weaker, they were in groups. They couldn't kill them, but they had to block them all. It was really difficult. The one who felt the most constrained was Tian Can. He was a martial cultivator, and every move he made seemed to be fatal. Facing this situation, he could only block them with his aura. Ling Yunhe saw through him. He sighed and said, "Brother Tian, I'll have to trouble you." Tian Jiqian chuckled. "Since I'm here, how can I do nothing?" He walked to the center, raised the jade plate in his hand, made a hand seal, and shouted softly. A stream of spiritual aura was injected into the jade plate. The jade plate shone brightly, and the 5 elements, yin, yang, and 8 trigrams on it began to operate. Emotinga's eyes brightened. She could be considered half a formation master, so she could see Tian Jiqian was laying a formation. However, his method of laying a formation was different from those that required the assistance of formation discs, formation flags, and spirit stones. It was based on the changes of the 5 elements, yin, and yang around him. He used his own spiritual aura to create restraints to achieve the effect of a formation. It could be called a formation, but it was actually invisible. It couldn't be called a formation, but it could indeed achieve the effect of a formation. Therefore, formation masters called it invisible formation. Invisible formations couldn't be compared to some big formations. They couldn't achieve the effect of controlling the enemy, but they were more flexible. As long as they had a formation plate, a formation master could lay a formation at any time to form restraints. Being able to lay an invisible formation was a sign of a formation master. Mo Tiange believed her formation skills weren't inferior to most formation masters, but she still couldn't lay an invisible formation. In the end, her focus was still on cultivation. Although she had a lot of knowledge about formations, compared to specialized formation masters, her formation techniques were still a bit inferior. This Tian Jiqian came from the 5 Elements Valley and was already in the middle stage of the core formation realm. His fighting skills were very ordinary. It seemed all his skills were on formations. After realizing this, Mo Tiange realized Ling Yunhe wasn't careless in asking Tian Jiqian to go with them. With Tian Jiqian's invisible formation, even if Ling Yunfei was a bit inferior, the strength of the 3 of them together was not inferior to her, Tiancan, and Yang Qingji. In the end, The formation plate emitted a dazzling white light. Tianjichin shouted, "Go!" The moment he spoke, Emotinga sensed the spiritual aura in her surroundings stabilizing. An invisible defensive formation enveloped the six of them. Those cat demons suddenly felt as if they had run into an invisible wall. With one pounce, they were all sent flying. This way. Ling Yunhe raised the soul-restraining bead and pointed in a direction. The six of them didn't stop and flew away. Chapter 373. By the time they got rid of the leopard cats, the six of them were exhausted. With their core formation realm cultivations, they wouldn't be so tired. However, in this carefree valley, all kinds of breaths were mixed together. Although their cultivation levels didn't decrease, their strength was greatly suppressed. Emotinga looked at Tianjichin, whose forehead was covered in sweat, and asked Ling Yunhe, "Fellow Taoist Ling, is this place safe?" Ling Yunhe looked around and nodded. "It's okay. Let's rest for a while." Ling Yunfei and Tianjichin were both relieved. Ling Yunfei's cultivation level was the lowest, and Tianjichin had to maintain a formation, which consumed the most spiritual power. As soon as they heard they could rest, they almost collapsed. Tianjichin struggled to hold on, and handed a formation plate to Ling Yunhe. "Brother Ling, please arrange this formation." Ling Yunhe nodded. "Brother Tian, just rest." He took the formation plate, skillfully arranged the formation, and called out to the other three people, "Fellow Taoists, rest too. I'll guard the formation." Emotinga and the other two people also felt tired, so they each found a place to rest inside the formation. Although they said they wanted to rest, they didn't completely relax. At least, Emotinga found vigilance in Yang Qingji and Tiansan's eyes. She smiled in her heart. This group of people was invited by Ling Yunhe to help. They agreed to help because Ling Yunhe had promised them certain conditions. However, it was also possible that they wanted to take the opportunity to enter Carefree Valley to find some spiritual treasures. She originally thought Ling Yunhe's two helpers were a bit weaker, so she wasn't so vigilant. Now that she realized Tianjichin had this kind of skill, she was naturally very afraid. Tianjichin and Ling Yunfei were Ling Yunhe's most reliable companions. Although Ling Yunhe had deliberately found three people with similar cultivation bases to them to form a balance and reassure everyone, they were not familiar with each other. Comparatively speaking, they were already at a disadvantage. Now that they had discovered that Tianjichin was not as weak as they had imagined, they naturally had to be even more careful. However, Emotinga pondered. Just now, Ling Yunhe asked Tianjichin to show his strength to intimidate them. After adjusting her breathing for a while, her spiritual aura was completely restored and her spirit was also much better. She stopped meditating and opened her eyes. She cultivated the art of the origin, and also obtained Qin Shi's pure yang aura. Now that she had a small origin inside her body, she could continuously replenish her spiritual aura, so her recovery time was shorter than theirs. "Fellow Taoist Qin." Ling Yunhe's voice rang out in his ears. Emotinga stopped and turned around. Upon seeing Ling Yunhe walking towards her and sitting down next to her, Emotinga smiled and said, "Is something the matter, fellow Taoist Ling?" Ling Yunhe also returned a smile. He looked at her, and there was a sense of evaluation in his gaze. "Has fellow Taoist Qin's spiritual aura recovered?" Emotinga nodded. "So fast." Ling Yunhe stared at her for a long time. "Fellow Taoist, you really don't show your true colors." "Fellow Taoist Ling, please don't misunderstand," Emotinga said faintly. "I just have a special cultivation technique that allows me to recover my spiritual aura faster. In terms of cultivation level, I'm not stronger than fellow Taoist." "Is that so?" Ling Yunhe didn't ask any more questions, but from his expression, he didn't seem to believe it. Emotinga didn't feel like explaining. She took the map of Carefree Valley and looked down at it carefully. After a while, Emotinga asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, you said the Carefree tree doesn't grow in a fixed place. Carefree Valley is so big. How are we going to find it?" Ling Yunhe smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, could it be that you've forgotten the characteristics of my cultivation technique?" Emotinga was stunned. "Fellow Taoist, You mean your cultivation technique is very sensitive to the aura of spiritual treasures, so you're using it to search? Ling Yunha nodded. Since the carefree fruit is such a spiritual treasure, it'll definitely cause changes in the spiritual aura, in the surroundings no matter where it is. As long as I'm within a certain range, I'll be able to sense it. I see. No wonder he never told her how to search for treasures. After a while, Tianqian finished regulating his breath and opened his eyes. Ling Yunha nodded at the two of them. I'll also go rest. Fellow Taoists, please stay alert. Upon seeing the two of them nodding, Ling Yunha turned around, found a corner, sat cross-legged, and regulated his breath. Mo Tiange and Tianqian didn't have anything to say. They just nodded at each other as a greeting, and went their separate ways. At this time, Mo Tiange suddenly felt movement in her spiritual beast bag. She looked down, and saw that it was the spiritual beast bag containing Feifei. The three spiritual beasts had all reached the 5th rank now. Xiaohua and Xiaofan were strong, and could be of great help in times of crisis. As for Feifei, although it wasn't good at fights of magical powers, it had a special ability. Mo Tiange knew this trip wouldn't be easy, so she simply took all three of them with her. Could it be that something happened to Feifei? She quietly opened the spiritual beast bag, but didn't let Feifei out. Instead, she used her divine comprehension to communicate with it. Feifei, what's the matter? After a while, Feifei's voice rang in her mind. Since they had a spiritual beast contract, Feifei could speak, so it was very convenient to communicate with her divine comprehension. Master, what's this place? The spiritual aura here is very strong. Mo Tiange said, of course. This is a paradise from the distant past era. Unfortunately, the world has changed and this place has changed. No matter how strong the spiritual aura here is, it's useless now. Oh, I found the spiritual aura here is a bit strange. There seems to be a lot of good things here. Mo Tiange was stunned. She suddenly remembered that in addition to calming its mind and coexisting peacefully with almost all demonic beasts, Feifei was also very sensitive to spiritual aura, and could seek treasures. What do you feel? Is there the aura of spiritual treasures? Feifei was silent for a while, then said, I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with these things, so I can't be sure. Master, don't close the spiritual beast bag. Let me sense it for a while. I feel the spiritual aura here is very friendly. All right. Since Feifei signed a spiritual beast contract with her, it had been kept in the virtual sky world and rarely went out, so its perception of spiritual aura wasn't that strong. With this thought in mind, Mo Tiange agreed to its request. A moment later, Ling Yunha and the others finished adjusting their breaths and stopped meditating. The group was ready to set off again. Mo Tiange felt the atmosphere in the group change slightly. At the beginning, Tianqian and Yang Qingji were a little careless. Although they kept their promise and listened to Ling Yunha, it was obvious that they did not take him seriously. However, at this moment, they were much more cautious. Whether it was because he was wary of Ling Yunha's group of three, or because he had seen Tian Jiqian's methods, he no longer underestimated him. In any case, Ling Yunha's goal should have been achieved. The two of them were shocked. As for Mo Tiange, she wasn't too worried. She had 3 5th-rank spiritual beasts with her. Even if Feifei couldn't fight, it shouldn't be difficult for her to protect herself with Xiaofan and Xiaohua. Fellow Taoist Ling, Tianqian suddenly said, this carefree valley is so big. How are we going to find the carefree fruit you mentioned? Mo Tiange had asked Ling Yunha this question in private before. Now Ling Yunha answered, fellow Taoist Tianqian, don't worry. We're still in the outer valley. The carefree fruit only grows in the inner valley of Carefree Valley. We still have several tests to pass. Is that so? Tianqian looked around and said doubtfully. The spiritual aura here is already shockingly rich. Moreover, we encountered those cat demons as soon as we entered the valley. If we still have several tests to pass, won't it be very dangerous? Ling Yunha paused for a while, then sighed and said, if it wasn't dangerous, why would I pay such a big price to invite you to go with me? I might as well be frank. Each of your conditions isn't easy to fulfill. If it weren't for my nascent soul ancestor, even I wouldn't be able to get those spiritual treasures. Spiritual treasures? Mo Tiange's gaze swept between Tianqian and Yang Qingji. She wondered what kind of conditions they put forward, that even an elder of a big sect like Ling Yunhe felt it was difficult to fulfill. Speaking of which, her conditions weren't easy to fulfill. The grudge between her and Han Shiji was fine. Presumably, with Ling Yunhe's identity, Han Shiji wouldn't refuse her request. However, it wasn't easy to get the complete art of Sunu. Cultivation techniques and spirit veins were the foundation of a sect. Spirit veins couldn't be stolen or lost, so all big sects put all their energy into preserving cultivation techniques. Every sect, even if it was only a small sect with 100 or so people, had a library that stored cultivation techniques. Not only was it protected by formations and restrictions, but it was also guarded by high-level cultivators. Even the sect's disciples had to go through layers of security when they entered. Furthermore, they couldn't read books that were above their realm. Mo Tiange agreed to Ling Yunhe's conditions because she couldn't think of a solution. However, she didn't have much hope that he would be able to obtain the art of Sunu. Thinking up to this point, she felt she was at a disadvantage. Neither of her conditions could be fulfilled in a short time. It could be said that if she followed Ling Yunhe into Carefree Valley, she wouldn't be able to ask for something like a deposit. If she was unlucky and Ling Yunhe couldn't leave Carefree Valley safely, she would be empty-handed and wouldn't be able to get anything. In the end, she was too inexperienced. She had never helped others before, so she simply didn't think about this matter. Otherwise, if she asked Ling Yunhe for some benefits first, he wouldn't refuse. However, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Taoists, you don't have to worry too much. I said before that I'm more than 70% sure I can leave safely. I wasn't lying. Our Juyan sect's seniors have long been here, so I've already prepared how to break through these barriers." Tianqian took a deep look at Ling Yunhe then nodded. "I hope fellow Taoist Ling will keep his word." In the group of 6, Ling Yunhe and Mo Tiange walked in the front, Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei walked in the middle, and Tianqian and Yang Qingji stayed at the back. Tian Jiqian held his jade plate and observed the changes in the aura of the 5 elements around him from time to time. The sky in Carefree Valley was always gray. Mo Tiange raised her head and saw that the surrounding cliffs were towering, revealing only a small part of the sky. The air was filled with dust and fog visible to the naked eye, so everything in front of them was hazy. The 6 of them advanced silently. The chaotic aura surrounded them, so they had to constantly maintain spiritual aura protection to keep the filthy aura out. After a long time, Ling Yunhe finally stopped and said, "Everyone, we'll enter the inner valley from here." Mo Tiange stuck her head out to take a look and was shocked. This was a narrow valley entrance that could only allow 2 people to walk side by side. At the entrance of the valley, there was a crack. It was dark and looked like a greedy mouth that was waiting to devour passers-by. Chapter 374. This is... Ling Yunfei was shocked when he saw the crack at the mouth of the valley. He looked at Ling Yunhe and asked, "Second brother, how do we get through this?" This crack was extremely wide and occupied the entire narrow entrance of the valley. Moreover, it looked very deep. At first glance, it seemed bottomless. Most importantly, the black aura inside was surging, and the smell of filth was especially strong. Mo Tiange looked up and saw cliffs on both sides of the mouth of the valley. The cliffs at the top were joined together, making the entire mouth of the valley look like an arch. It was really difficult to fly over. The filthy aura had a great effect on cultivators. The filthy aura that was emitted after the death of the lynx had already forced them to retreat. The filthy aura in this crack was more than 10 times denser than before. If they tried to fly over, they would probably consume too much spiritual aura, and their strength would decrease. This was only the mouth of the valley. They didn't know where the fretless fruit was, so it was definitely unwise to take such a risk at this time. Ling Yunhe said, "With the soul restraining bead, we can restrain the filth. However, we still have to take some risks to cross this crack. What do you think?" Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. Yang Qingji snorted and said, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why do you ask so many questions? We're already here. What can we do if we don't agree?" Ling Yunhe smiled. Sorry, I asked a meaningless question. He paused for a moment then said, I have a way, but it requires some risks. Second brother, if you have a way, just say it. We have to find a way to cross, Ling Yunfei said eagerly. Ling Yunhe glanced at him, but didn't say anything. He opened the spiritual beast pouch on his waist, and in an instant, a strange aura rushed over. This is. The other 5 people's expressions changed. They saw a black and shiny vulture flying out of Ling Yunhe's spiritual beast pouch. Judging from its aura, it was already in the 5th rank. Its eyes were fierce, and its claws were sharp. A vulture spirit beast wasn't a big deal. But this vulture was obviously not an ordinary spirit beast. Its body was filled with a heavy aura of death. Fellow Taoists, this is a vulture I found in the Western barbarians by accident. In the Western barbarians, regardless of whether it was a mortal or a cultivator, they would be given a sky burial after death, and their corpses would be swallowed by vultures. This vulture might have eaten too many corpses and mutated. It's full of death aura, but it's still able to survive. Death aura. Emotienga had suffered greatly because of it before. Several dozen years ago, when she was still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, she accidentally went to the northernmost area of the celestial pole and met Jiang Shanghang, who saved her in Yunwu sect. From there, she got to know a group of Zhengfa sect cultivators. That Zhengfa sect cultivator, Ren Yufeng, obtained a stone tablet from an ancient divine temple. Because of that, she cultivated a strange aura of death, which almost caused her to die in Linhai's Bishuan court. There were a lot of strange things about this matter, because dead aura could only exist on dead people. Logically speaking, it was difficult for living people to escape death once they were contaminated with dead aura. She and several Bishuan court cultivators, who were slightly contaminated with dead aura, had to spend a very long time to get rid of it. She couldn't understand this matter. Later, when she brought that stone tablet back to Xianqing school, Lord Taoist Jinghe felt it was strange, so he asked for it to study. Later, she forgot to ask him about it. Now she saw a vulture with dead aura all over its body. This vulture's situation was different from Ren Yufeng's. When Ren Yufeng was covered in dead aura, he almost turned into a skeleton. He couldn't be considered a person at all. However, this vulture was living too well. Its fur was glossy and smooth, and it looked vigorous and strong. Regarding filthy aura, I once asked my group's nascent soul seniors for advice. This aura can corrode the body and slowly make living things lose their vitality. Dead aura is the same. Therefore, dead aura can also be considered a kind of filthy aura. Fellow Taoist Ling is right, Yang Qingji suddenly said. We devil cultivators know more about these things than you do. Filthy aura isn't limited to dead aura, but we consider dead aura to be a kind of filthy aura. Tian Jiqian was puzzled. What does this have to do with the matter at hand? Brother Ling, do you want to let your spiritual beast fly over? But that still can't solve our problem. Yang Qingji cast a glance at him then said, I'm guessing fellow Taoist Ling wants us to hide in the dead aura to muddle our way through, right? Ling Yunhe nodded and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Yang is right. That's exactly what I mean. Second brother, this is very dangerous, isn't it? Ling Yunfei looked at the vulture with a vigilant expression. We're trapped in dead aura. What's the difference between being surrounded by filthy aura and being surrounded by dead aura? The difference is that this is my spiritual beast. Ling Yunhe stroked the vulture's head. When he reached out his hand, the vulture didn't resist at all. It even opened its mouth and let out a cry, rubbing his hand as if it was acting like a spoiled child. Mo Tiange discovered that the vulture's dead aura seemed to have no effect on Ling Yunhe. When he reached out his hand, the dead aura automatically moved away. Was it because he was the vulture's master? Everyone rest assured. I can control this dead aura at will, and make it form a circle around us without harming us. As long as you're a bit more careful, you can pass through it easily. Ling Yunhe's voice trailed off, but no one responded. A middle-stage core formation cultivator, with a 5th-rank spiritual beast, could be considered a great help. In a fight of magical powers, the spiritual beast could suppress cultivators in the same realm as him. However, This spiritual beast also had a unique dead aura, so everyone couldn't help but be afraid. Mo Tiange finally realized that Ling Yunhe boldly invited the three of them, because he had something to rely on. In terms of strength, Shi Tiancan and Yang Qingji were naturally stronger than Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei. However, with the help of Tian Jiqian's invisible formation and this dead aura spiritual beast, Ling Yunhe's strength was far beyond their imagination. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. This Ling Yunhe was famous. He was one of the genius disciples of Juyan sect, the #1 sect in Yunzhong. His status in the sect was so high that he shouldn't be inferior to Qin Shi's. How could a cultivator like him be weak? Tian Can and Yang Qingji naturally also thought of what she could think of, but they were more afraid of the method Ling Yunhe proposed. The spiritual beast belonged to Ling Yunhe alone. If they agreed, they would be surrounded by the dead aura. At that time, their lives would be in Ling Yunhe's hands. Cultivators cherished their lives. How could they put their lives in someone else's hands? Whether it was Mo Tiange, Tiancan, or Yang Qingji, none of them were willing. Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. Tian Jiqian looked a bit hesitant. Ling Yunhe was his good friend, so he trusted him to a certain extent. However, this was an extraordinary matter, so he couldn't make a decision immediately. As for Ling Yunfei, he still looked a bit confused. He looked at Ling Yunhe, then looked at the others. The 6 of them were in a deadlock for a while. Ling Yunhe stared at them, patiently waiting for their answer. After a while Tiancan spoke. His voice was sharp and his tone was even worse. Fellow Taoist Ling, why didn't you tell us about this before you left? Could it be that your excellency is waiting for us to enter Carefree Valley, and have no choice but to agree? Ling Yunhe said calmly. If I told you, would fellow Taoist Tiancan agree to come? Of course not. Tiancan's tone was resolute. If that was the case, I wouldn't agree no matter what condition fellow Taoist Ling proposed. That's right. Ling Yunhe said faintly. I was indeed worried you wouldn't agree, so I didn't tell you beforehand. This matter is very important to me. Time is too tight. If any of you are unwilling to come, I'm afraid our trip to Carefree Valley will be in vain. Yang Qingji said coldly. We can also turn hostile now. Does fellow Taoist Ling think you can force us to participate? Facing Yang Qingji's fierce attitude, Ling Yunhe sighed and said, Fellow Taoist Yang, you're overthinking it. What I did wasn't honorable, but I didn't mean to offend you. Fellow Taoist Qin is fine, but fellow Taoist Yang, fellow Taoist Tiancan, I've already paid a spiritual treasure for your help. If I wasn't sincere, why would I do this? But you did this. Everyone. Ling Yunhe interrupted Yang Qingji and said, The reason why I did this is because I hope you'll reconsider. If I told you beforehand, you most likely wouldn't consider it, and would have decided to withdraw. In that case, time would be too tight, and it would be difficult for me to find more people. Now that we're already in Carefree Valley, it'll be difficult for us to go back. I hope you'll reconsider. I've already paid the price. Is it necessary to hurt you at this time? Still no one spoke. What Ling Yunhe said wasn't unreasonable, but the 3 of them still looked unsightly. Taking risks was one thing, but being schemed against was another. They weren't afraid of risks. They were angry at being schemed against. It wasn't that Ling Yunhe couldn't be trusted, but core formation cultivators all had their own pride. Brother Ling Yu, Tian Jiqian also sighed. If you told me beforehand, based on our many years of friendship, how could I not agree? Why did you hide it from me? Ling Yunhe was stunned. He turned to look at Tian Jiqian and said apologetically, Brother Tian, I didn't mean to hide it from you, but I didn't mean to harm you. Of course I know that. Tian Jiqian paused for a while and said, No matter what, I'll go in with you. Ling Yunhe smiled. I knew you. Second brother. I don't need to say anything, Ling Yunfei said. I've always listened to you, and I'll do the same today. Ling Yunhe nodded, but he still turned to the 3 of them. He thought for a while and said, How about this? We're not in a hurry, so we can rest for half a day at the entrance of the valley. How about you use this time to think about it? As long as you continue to help me enter the inner valley, I'll give each of you a bottle of vital peace pills in addition to the conditions I promised before as repayment. Even if you don't agree, you can leave the valley on your own. I won't stop you. And I won't ask for the spiritual treasure I gave you before. Chapter 375. Vital Peace Pill. Mo Tiange didn't know what it was, but Yang Qingji's eyes lit up the moment he heard what Ling Yunhe said. Even Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei looked towards Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe smiled and said nothing. Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, what's an intrinsic peace pill?" Ling Yunhe paused for a moment and said with a smile, "Apologies. I forgot that fellow Taoist Qin isn't from Cloud Midst. I believe you also haven't heard of my Julian Sect's Essence Peace Pill. This pill is one of the high-grade pills of my Julian Sect. It can be used to break through bottlenecks. Of course, it's not guaranteed to be effective." "I see." Ling Yunhe didn't say much, but based on the expressions of Yang Qingji and the others, it wasn't difficult for Mo Tiange to guess that this essential peace pill must be a very rare and precious medicinal pill, which was why it could make disciples from famous cultivation groups like Yang Qingji so envious. Ling Yunfei looked at her and explained with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Qin, our Julian Sect's Vital Peace Pill is a famous elixir in Yunzhong. Even us inner sect disciples find it hard to obtain it, much less outsiders." He looked at Ling Yunhe with a face full of envy. "If it wasn't for the fact that my second brother is deeply favored by the patriarch, I'm afraid he would be like me, waiting for a few years to get a few." "Really?" Ling Yunfei was already a core formation cultivator, so he could be considered an elder in the Julian sect. However, he could only wait for a few pills. It seemed like these pills were indeed very precious. Ling Yunhe had really gone all out this time. "A pill that can help one break through bottlenecks?" Tianqin asked. He looked at Ling Yunhe and asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, is this true?" "That's right." Ling Yunhe raised his eyebrows. "Taoist Tianqin has never heard of the Vital Peace Pill?" Tianqin said indifferently, "I've always lived in seclusion in a desolate place and rarely go out. I'm not clear about the affairs of Eastern Tang." "I see." Ling Yunhe pointed to an empty space at the side and said, "Everyone, go and take a rest. There's no rush to make a decision." Seeing that Ling Yunhe had finished setting up the defensive array formation, the others hesitated for a moment before going back to rest. Mo Tiange noticed that the hostile atmosphere had become a lot more peaceful, so she cast a meaningful glance at Ling Yunhe. This person could not be underestimated. If one were to say that he was magnanimous, he would also play tricks. If one were to say that he was sinister, he would offer very generous terms. Just as Ling Yunhe had said, if he had explained everything clearly beforehand, there was an 80% chance that the group would have dispersed before they could even enter Carefree Valley. After all, to these people, no one was willing to put their lives in the hands of others, no matter how generous the conditions were. But now, they had all entered the Carefree Valley, and were at the entrance of the inner valley. It would not be easy for them to leave even if they wanted to. Thus, the conditions that they could accept were slightly more relaxed. And Ling Yunhe agreed to give out the Origin Peace Pill at this time, after discovering that he had been hiding something. The others were originally very dissatisfied, and might very well leave in a huff. However, after hearing his promise, they calmed down. Even if someone were to leave in the end, they probably wouldn't bear any grudges against him. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. A magnanimous person was worth befriending, but it would be difficult for him to gain a foothold in the immortal cultivation world. A clever person could mingle with wind and water, but people would respect him from afar. And this Ling Yunhe seemed to be in between the two, making people unable to be angry or happy. However, it was undeniable that if a person like him could really become the head of Julian sect, he would probably have a very good life. Fellow Taoist Qin, a person was sitting cross-legged in the corner, thinking about her own matters, when she suddenly heard an ear-piercing voice. Mo Tiange turned her head, and found that it was Tianqin. Aside from the fight they had before, she had no contact with Tianqin during this trip. She didn't know why Tianqin was talking to her now. "Fellow Taoist Tianqin, what's the matter?" Tianqian looked around and sat down not far from her. With a wave of his hand, he laid a soundproof barrier and said faintly, "What do you think about this?" Emotienga was stunned. "Fellow Taoist Tianqian, are you asking me what I plan to do?" "Yes." Tianqian nodded and looked at her with his only exposed eyes. Ling Yunhe is indeed cunning, but he's also sincere. Since he has agreed to those conditions, we should be safe before he obtains the fretless fruit. However, it's hard to say whether he'll turn against us or not. Emotienga didn't speak for a long time. Tianqian couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist Qin, what do you think?" Emotienga thought, they don't seem to be familiar with each other, right? These words seem to be too sincere. But he seems to be seriously discussing with me, so it seems a bit unreasonable to say that. She thought for a while and said, "What about fellow Taoist Tianqian? What's your decision?" Tianqian said, "I just can't decide. To tell you the truth, the thing Ling Yunhe promised me is very important to me. If I have it, my future cultivation path will be much smoother. It could be said that taking a certain amount of risk for this item was worth it." But he paused and glanced at the others. Ling Yunhe was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the formation, adjusting his breath with his eyes closed. His spiritual beast, the vulture, was perched on his shoulder, staring ahead fiercely and glancing at the others from time to time. Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian seemed to be chatting. Tianqian laid a soundproof barrier around them, so they couldn't hear each other. As for Yang Qingji, he was leaning against the mountain wall with his arms crossed. He seemed to be thinking about something. "There must be something wrong," Tianqian said. "Fellow Taoist Qin, please take a look. The three of us invited by Ling Yunhe aren't mediocre. On the contrary, Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei are far weaker than us. Tian Jiqian is a formation master. But what about Ling Yunfei? Could it be that Ling Yunhe, as a candidate for the head of Juyan sect, has a good relationship with many people and can't find a stronger companion? Even if the Ling clan doesn't have one, Juyan sect must have one, right?" Emotienga said. He said this matter involves the interests of various cultivation groups in the sect and disputes between clans, so it's not good to invite martial brothers who have a good relationship with us. Humph. Tianqian showed a hint of mockery in his eyes. "Is that true?" "Yinzhong isn't." He paused halfway through his sentence before continuing. "The number one sect in Yunzhong lives up to its name. They have more than 10 nascent soul cultivators, and more than 100 core formation cultivators. How could they not be able to find a decent helper?" From what Ling Yunfei said, Ling Yunhe is very favored by the nascent soul ancestor of the Ling clan. For the sake of his beloved grandson, and the benefit of the alliance, even if he doesn't care, other people won't care, right? Emotienga lowered her gaze and kept smiling. Her expression didn't change at all. Tianqian blinked and continued to ask, "Fellow Taoist Qin, can you at least tell me something?" Emotienga looked up and asked, "What is it? What do you think about this matter?" Emotienga sighed and said, "I want to know who you are, fellow Taoist Tianqian." Tianqian was stunned and his eyes became fierce. "What do you mean, fellow Taoist Qin?" Emotienga said faintly, "First of all, aren't you afraid that I have a friendship with Ling Yunhe, and will pretend not to know him, so I can pin down other people?" Tianqian narrowed his eyes and stared at her without saying anything. Emotienga continued, "Second, even if you're sure I have nothing to do with Ling Yunhe, and we don't have any friendship, you shouldn't say these things to a stranger, right?" Tiansan's hands were clenched. "Finally, what's the point of saying these things to me, fellow Taoist Tianqian? Do you think you'll believe whatever I say?" After listening to her, Tianqian stared at her without moving or saying anything for a long time. Emotienga just smiled. In other people's eyes, they were just chatting and didn't have any dispute. After a while, Tianqian finally let go of her. He looked at Emotienga and said calmly, "Now isn't the time to tell you who I am. Just like fellow Taoist Qin, you also concealed your background. However, I can be frank with you. I said these things to you because I want to find a temporary companion. It's better than taking risks alone." Emotienga raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Why me? Fellow Taoist Yang is also good. Although he's only in the early stage of the core formation realm, His strength doesn't seem inferior to ours. Tianqian shook his head, stared at his hands and said faintly, Fellow Taoist Yang is a devil path cultivator and the disciple of one of the 3 devil monarchs. I don't want to have any entanglement with him. Besides, fellow Taoist Qin's strength surpasses ordinary middle stage core formation cultivators. She's stronger than fellow Taoist Yang. But I'm a female cultivator. Mo Tiange looked at him with a smile. Generally speaking, even if there's a gap between the middle stage and the early stage, I'd still think it's safer to choose a male cultivator, right? Of course, she didn't think she was weaker than male cultivators. However, it was a common phenomenon in the cultivation world to value men over women. Even if the cultivation level of male cultivators was slightly lower, they'd still think male cultivators were more reliable, because male cultivators were more decisive in handling matters. In a life-or-death situation, male cultivators could perform better. Upon hearing her question, Tianqian glared at her angrily. So what if she's a female cultivator? Is fellow Taoist Qin also someone who belittles himself? Mo Tiange was a little surprised by his anger, but she didn't get angry. She just shook her head and reminded him, Fellow Taoist Tianqian, if your behavior is suspicious, I won't dare to form an alliance with you. Tianqian was stunned by her words, but he slowly calmed down. When he completely calmed down, Tianqian said, On our way here, I've observed fellow Taoist Qin's behavior. She's no worse than male cultivators. Fellow Taoist Yang, on the other hand, has an extraordinary identity, so I don't want to have anything to do with him. There are 6 of us in total, and those 3 are in the same group. That being the case, I don't have any other choice. Mo Tiange nodded, accepting his explanation. She thought for a while then said, Fellow Taoist Tianqian, does that mean you're going to agree to Ling Yunhe's offer and continue taking risks? Tianqian nodded. Yes, I have to say Ling Yunhe's very powerful. Since we're already here, even if he wants us to leave on our own, we still have to consider whether we can leave safely or not. On second thought, he offered us such a generous reward, which is very tempting. Moreover, he has no reason to harm us at this time, so it's worth a gamble. But there's a risk after this, right? Mo Tiange continued. According to fellow Taoists' inference, after we find the carefree fruit, they might turn hostile. Exactly. This is the reason why I want to form an alliance with fellow Taoist Qin. Tianqian stared at Ling Yunhe, who was still meditating, with deep fear in his eyes. Chapter 376. It was impossible for the other 4 to not know that the 2 of them had set up a soundproofing barrier, but they all turned a blind eye to it. It was normal for a group of unfamiliar people to take risks together. Everyone had a tacit understanding. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, was tapping the heaven and earth fan in her hand again and again. She seemed to be contemplating and didn't answer. Tianqian seemed to be a little impatient with her knocking. He couldn't help but ask, Fellow Taoist Qin, do you need to think for so long? Mo Tiange raised her head and smiled at him. It's a matter of life and death, so I naturally have to consider it carefully. For the last time, the heaven and earth fan knocked on the palm of her hand, and she clenched it tightly. All right, if an accident really happens, as long as fellow Taoist Tianqian can abide by the agreement at this moment, I will stand on the same side as you. After a pause, she raised her eyebrows and emphasized, However, fellow Taoist Tianqian, the premise of all of this is that Ling Yunhe doesn't keep his promise. We're only here to protect ourselves. If fellow Taoist has other motives, don't blame me for not lending a helping hand. Tianqian was stunned. He looked at her deeply and nodded. Of course. After a while, Ling Yunhe finally opened his eyes. He looked at Yang Qingji with a smile, then turned towards Mo Tiange and Tianqian. Fellow Taoists, have you decided? At that moment, Yang Qingji was still lost in thought. Tianqian and Mo Tiange had already removed the soundproof barrier and were meditating with their eyes closed. Yang Qingji was the first to come back to his senses. Looking at the vulture on his shoulder, he said, I want to see the origin piece pill first. Ling Yunhe nodded. Of course. He then turned towards Mo Tiange and Tianqian. What about fellow Taoists? Tianqin was the first to say, "That's true." Ling Yunhe looked at Emotianga. Upon seeing her calm expression, he smiled and said, "It seems fellow Taoist Qin also agreed." Emotianga sighed helplessly. She didn't like Ling Yunhe's smile right now. This person was frank and cunning, but cunning and kind at the same time. He always looked like he had everything under control. When he smiled like this, there was an 80% chance that things were going as he wished. However, she extended a finger and shook it at Ling Yunhe. "Fellow Taoist Ling, there are some things that we need to make clear first. The conditions that you promised before can only be fulfilled after the fact. If you fall out with me afterwards, I won't be able to reason with you." As for the other two fellow Taoists, they seemed to have received a portion of the rewards that they had set. "That's easy." Without hesitation, Ling Yan took something out of his Qingkuan bag and tossed it to Emotianga. "With this, Julian sect must do something for fellow Taoist, no matter how difficult it is. Before I complete this task for fellow Taoist Qin, I will leave this item in your care for the time being." Emotianga took the toy. This was an ordinary-looking wooden plaque that was no more than 2 inches in length and width. There were no decorative patterns on it, only a faint spiritual light. Based on Emotianga's experience, this should be a special talisman. Moreover, it was the kind that was passed on secretly. Its aura was very ancient, and it must have been passed down for at least several thousand years. Returning kindness medallion. Once Ling Yunfei saw this object, his expression immediately changed. He stared fixedly at the wooden tablet in Emotianga's hand. Emotianga was astonished. She cast a glance at Ling Yunfei, then waved the wooden tablet at Ling Yunhe. "Does this have any special significance?" After his astonishment, Ling Yunfei's expression quickly returned to normal. He said to Emotianga solemnly, "This is our Julian sect's returning kindness medallion. The holder of this object is our Julian sect's guest elder. With this object in hand, our Julian sect's disciples are not allowed to harm a single hair on their head. Moreover, they can request Julian sect to do one thing for them. As long as it doesn't harm the sect's interests, they must complete it no matter how difficult it is." He looked at Ling Yunhe with a complicated expression. "In our entire Julian sect, there are only 3 pieces of this object. I didn't expect one of them to be in second brother's hands." Returning kindness medallion? Emotianga narrowed her eyes. Speaking of which, this seemed like the behavior of a chivalrous man in the secular world who kept his word. Did such things also exist in the cultivation world? Although they usually paid attention to their promises, it was normal for them to fall out at any time if it involved important interests. Tianqin stared at the wooden tablet with a doubtful gaze. "With this object in hand, will your Julian sect really not move a finger, and even do its best to complete the task?" "That's right." Ling Yunfei was once again a chatterbox. He spoke with fervor and assurance. "In Yunzhong, our Julian sect is the cultivation group that values the sect's inheritance and brotherhood the most. Our Grandmaster's 9 disciples all have deep brotherhood and advance and retreat together. That's why we're called Julian sect. This returning kindness medallion was left behind by our 9 Grandmasters. Back then, our Grandmaster received a great favor from someone, so he gifted this object to that person. He promised that with this returning kindness medallion, he would be able to move around Julian sect unimpeded and become a guest elder until he fulfilled his promise. After several thousand years, these 3 returning kindness medallions returned to the sect one after another and never appeared in the world again." Emotianga waved the ordinary-looking wooden tablet in her hand and said to Ling Yunhe, "In that case, this object must be very valuable?" "It's far more than valuable." The one who answered her was still Ling Yunfei. "With our Julian sect's strength, if this object is leaked, it might even tempt nascent soul cultivators. A guest elder enjoyed all the benefits of an elder. They could use the sect's resources and weren't bound by the sect's restrictions. For some cultivators, this was indeed an excellent position." Once Ling Yunfei finished speaking, Emotianga turned her head to look. Tian Jiqian and Yang Qingji's eyes flashed with fervor as they stared at the object. It seemed like they really wanted to snatch it back. As a result, Emotinga was confused. Not to mention that Ling Yunhe wasn't the sect head of Juyin sect. Even if he was, such a valuable object would most likely be safeguarded by a nascent soul elder in the sect, right? He actually had one in his hands. Besides, he just casually threw this kind of object to someone else. Emotinga felt like her brain wasn't enough to process it. What was this Ling Yunhe thinking? As a cultivator, they had to be on guard at all times against being schemed against by others. Similarly, they had to avoid owing others too much. Owing others had two aspects. First, it was easy to develop inner demons. Second, it was easier to be schemed against by others. No matter which one it was, encountering it would be bad luck. Ling Yunhe was calm and composed. After Ling Yunfei roughly finished speaking, he said, "Since you have this object, does fellow Taoist Qin still have any doubts?" Emotinga looked at the wooden tablet, then her gaze swept over Ling Yunhe and Ling Yunfei. She then asked, "Even if I have this object in my hands, what if you snatch it back later?" Anger appeared on Ling Yunfei's face. He rushed to say, "That's impossible. This is the Patriarch's will. Disciples of Juyin sect never do this kind of thing." Although it was normal for cultivators to be two-faced, they also had their own taboos. When it came to matters related to the Patriarch, they rarely disobeyed. Emotinga muttered to herself for a moment, then put the wooden tablet into her robe. She originally thought she suffered a big loss because she didn't ask for the reward beforehand. She never expected that she would be the one who benefited the most from this. If things were really as Ling Yunfei said, then even if Ling Yunhe failed this trip and died here, she wouldn't suffer a loss. Seeing that she put the object away, Ling Yunhe heaved a sigh of relief. However, Tian Jiqian, Yang Qingji, and the others stared at Emotinga for a long time before they withdrew their gazes, looking very unwilling. Emotinga sighed inwardly. This Ling Yunhe is scheming again. Although this object was good, it was very troublesome. There were so many people here. Even if Ling Yunhe kept his promise, what if other people had evil intentions? Doing this seemed to give her a big advantage, but on the other hand, it was easy to put her on the fire. With so many people watching her obtain the return token, and Ling Yunfei mentioning the special meaning of this object, she couldn't cooperate with others anymore. Because with such a precious treasure in hand, it would be easy to divide the spoils unevenly. In that case, no one could trust each other, and cooperation would be impossible. Therefore, she could only stand on Ling Yunhe's side. But if she refused the return token now, this problem couldn't be solved. With benefits in front of her, she actually wasn't moved at all. What would Ling Yunhe think of her? The others would certainly be vigilant against her. They were now companions, so it wasn't good to be too vigilant. At this thought, she glanced at Tiancan. Tiancan stared at the entrance of the valley calmly, as if he wasn't interested in everything in front of him. Noticing that Emotinga was looking at him, he turned his head and nodded slightly. Emotinga understood what he meant. Everything would go on as they had agreed just now. This made her feel a little conflicted. She had reached an agreement with Tiancan, but Ling Yunhe made this move again. What if he really fell out with her after this? After pondering for a while, she couldn't help but shake her head and smile self-mockingly. She was getting more and more stupid. Ling Yunhe probably hoped that she wouldn't help others to rob his object, and Tiancan wanted to protect himself. These two didn't contradict each other. If Ling Yunhe kept his promise, she would certainly help him to the end. But if Ling Yunhe fell out with her after this, she could only cooperate with Tiancan to protect herself. Okay, since fellow Taoists have no objections, let's start now. We don't have much time. Ling Yunhe turned his hand, and 3 jade bottles appeared in his palm. He threw them one by one to them. These are primordial dawn. There are 3 pills in each bottle. Fellow Taoists, please check them. 3 pills. Tiancan repeated in a low voice. Ling Yunhe was still smiling, but his eyelids twitched. Fellow Taoist Tiancan, don't think these 3 pills are easy. Our Juyin sect can only concoct 1 or 2 furnaces a year. Plus, we have so many core formation cultivators, so we can only concoct 3 pills every few years. Emotinga pulled out the bottle stopper, poured out a fragrant snow-white medicinal pill, dipped it in some powder, then brought it to her nose and sniffed it. The ingredients of the medicinal pill were very clean, and the temperature was just right. She could tell that the level of the concocting master, who concocted this medicinal pill, was very high. At least he wasn't inferior to her. Juyin sect was Juyin sect, the #1 cultivation group in Yunzhong. The level of their concocting master was also very high. The other two people were also checking the medicinal pill. Tianqian only examined it a little. Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't have any abnormal expression when she poured the medicinal pill back, he put his portion into his Qiankuan bag. Yang Qingji was a bit more careful. He held a jade cup in his hand and poured the medicinal pill into it. He seemed to be studying something. Could it be that there were some restrictions on devil cultivators taking medicinal pills made by Dao cultivators? A few random thoughts flashed through her mind. Mo Tiange muttered to herself for a while, then put the bottle of primordial dawn away. It wasn't that she didn't have this kind of medicinal pill that could help her break through bottlenecks. However, since this was a spiritual pill that Juyin sect didn't teach to outsiders, it must have some extraordinary properties. There was no harm in putting it away. When Yang Qingji also put away the medicinal pill and turned his attention back to her, Ling Yunhe smiled. He patted Vulture on his shoulder and said, "We don't have much time. Let's go." Chapter 377. When they were surrounded by the dead aura, everyone unconsciously released their auras. Although they all agreed to Ling Yunhe's suggestion, as core formation cultivators, self-protection had become a kind of instinct. Although their self-protection methods were mostly useless in this situation, time passed quickly and slowly. This period of time passed both fast and slow at the same time. Aside from Ling Yunhe, the others all had grave expressions on their faces and were ready to attack. Mo Tiange had no doubt that if anything went wrong, they would immediately use their strongest killing moves to kill Ling Yunhe. Fortunately, that didn't happen. When their feet touched the ground, they all heaved sighs of relief. Then, the dead aura surrounding them gradually dispersed and disappeared without a trace. Ling Yunhe stroked the vulture on his shoulder, took out a medicinal pill, and fed it to comfort it. The vulture swallowed the medicinal pill, let out a satisfied cry, and stopped on his shoulder. Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief and glanced at Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe smiled and said loudly, "I'm a man of my word. Do you believe me now?" Just now, everyone was surrounded by the dead aura, and the vulture that produced the dead aura only listened to Ling Yunhe's orders. It could be said that everyone's lives were in his hands. Yang Qingji was the first to recover. He snorted and said coldly, "I don't dare to gamble on the way back." Ling Yunhe hadn't obtained the fretless fruit yet, and needed their help, so the possibility of him taking action was very low. When they returned, not to mention Yang Qingji, even Mo Tiange, who had the token of repayment, wouldn't dare to gamble. With this thought in mind, Mo Tiange turned to look at the dark crack at the entrance of the valley with a solemn expression. If she didn't use Ling Yunhe's method, she would have to consume a lot of spiritual aura to cross the crack, and she also had to be careful of other people's ambushes. After thinking for a long time, she sighed. This trip was more dangerous than she imagined. Carefree Valley was indeed a dangerous place, but more importantly, the people who came with them were all difficult to deal with and had evil intentions. "If you don't trust me on the way back, you can leave," Ling Yunhe said faintly. "I'll leave the valley as soon as I get the fretless fruit." Once he finished speaking, Yang Qingji let out a humph and turned his head away, ignoring him. Tianqian, on the other hand, glanced at Mo Tiange, but didn't say anything. Ling Yunhe didn't waste any more words. He scanned the surroundings and said, "Everyone, this is the inner valley of the Carefree Valley, and it's even more dangerous than the outer valley. If we don't unite, it's very likely that we'll be annihilated here. Thus, I hope that no matter what goals you have in your hearts, before we leave the valley, everyone should work together." Is there a need for fellow Taoist Ling to say that? Tianqian said coldly. For the sake of our own lives, we have to listen to him obediently. Hearing this, Ling Yunhe only smiled slightly, not offended. The group of 6 continued on their way. Emotinga raised her head and looked around. The inner valley of Carefree Valley was much narrower than the outer valley. It was surrounded by cliffs and had a complicated terrain. The aura here was even more strange. Sometimes it was rich spiritual aura, sometimes it was concentrated devil aura, and sometimes it was pure filthy aura. They were not mixed together. Instead, they were separated and crisscrossed. This caused the surrounding scenery to change step by step. Places with rich spiritual aura had rare spiritual flowers and herbs. Places with concentrated devil aura had objects of the devil path. And places with filthy aura were full of destructive aura. This was actually a good thing for the 6 of them. They just needed to observe more to avoid the filthy aura. Moreover, they also found many spiritual objects that were rarely seen in the outside world along the way. After a long time, Ling Yunfei became a bit impatient. He turned around and asked Ling Yunha, "Second brother, don't you feel it?" Ling Yunha shook his head and stared at him with a slightly reproachful gaze. "How long has it been? Why are you so impatient?" Ling Yunfei scratched his head and said, "I'm anxious." Tianjiqian laughed. "You can't be anxious. Yunfei, you have to learn more from your second brother. We're cultivators. How can we be impatient?" "I know." Ling Yunfei answered helplessly. Then he muttered unwillingly, "I know I can't compare with second brother, but I don't have to say it every day." Hearing this, Emotinga was speechless. Ling Yunfei didn't look much younger than Ling Yunha, but his temperament was much more childish. As for Ling Yunha, he naturally heard it too. He glanced at Emotinga helplessly but didn't say anything. Emotinga thought he must love this brother very much. He loved him so much that he blamed him so much. "Master, there's danger." Feifei's voice suddenly rang in her mind. Emotinga paused and secretly looked at the spiritual beast pouch. "What's wrong? What do you feel?" "There's a dangerous aura," Feifei shouted. "It's coming." As soon as he finished speaking, the jade plate in Tianjiqian's hand began to spin crazily. At the same time, Emotinga felt a strange aura coming from afar. "There's something," Ling Yunha shouted. "Everyone be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, that thing was already in front of them. Messy auras assaulted their faces. There was spiritual aura, devil aura, and filthy aura. Emotinga looked up and saw a huge shadow vaguely flashing between the rocks and giant trees. That shadow approached them quickly and appeared in front of them in just a moment. Seeing the thing in front of them, the 6 people were shocked and sucked in a breath of cold air. The monster in front of them had a dark brown body and long arms. It looked like a human but not a human. It was obviously an ape. However, this ape was as tall as 10 people and had 3 heads and 6 arms. It looked like a freak. "What's this?" Tianjiqian cried out involuntarily. "Monster," Ling Yunha murmured. He stared at the 3-headed ape without blinking and clenched the crescent moon jade knife in his hand. Emotinga turned her hand, and the heaven and earth fan appeared in her palm. The 3-headed ape was called a monster not because it had 3 heads and a strange appearance. There were so many strange phenomena in the cultivation world, so the 3-headed ape was nothing. The unusual thing about the thing in front of them was that the aura all over its body was mixed with spiritual aura, devil aura, and filthy aura. If a person had spiritual aura, he was an immortal cultivator. If he had devil aura all over his body, he was a devil cultivator. Even if he cultivated dead aura or filthy aura, he could only be considered an unorthodox cultivator. But if there was a person with so many auras mixed into one, he could only be considered a monster. There was no cultivation technique in the cultivation world that could accommodate so many auras. The same was true for beasts. Ordinary demonic beasts and cultivators absorbed spiritual aura. Demonic beasts in the devil domain could absorb devil aura. But under normal circumstances, there was absolutely no demonic beast that could absorb all kinds of aura and coexist with its body. This broke the hidden rules of the cultivation world, so it was definitely not a normal thing. The first one to react was Yangqingji. His eyes were cold. He unfolded the ghost face banner in his hand and devil aura surged. He stared at the giant ape in front of him and said coldly, "What are you waiting for? The one who strikes first has the advantage." He unfolded the ghost face banner and devil aura rushed towards the giant ape. The others seemed to have woken up from a dream. No matter what kind of strange thing this three-headed ape was, it was obvious that it was hostile to them. Ling Yunhe also quickly moved the crescent moon jade knife in his hand. He hid behind the ghost face banner and pounced on the giant ape. The giant ape didn't dodge. It blinked its huge bell-like eyes, as if it couldn't figure out what was flying towards it. However, what happened in the next moment made the six people's expressions change greatly. The devil aura from the ghost face banner and the crescent moon jade knife arrived at the giant ape's position one after the other and then stopped. The giant ape blinked and reached out its hand to touch the devil aura from the ghost face banner. The devil aura surged as if it wanted to swallow its finger. But in the next moment, the devil aura slowly dissipated between its fingers. Yang Qingji was shocked. He suddenly waved the ghost face banner in his hand, wanting to withdraw the devil aura. But the devil aura went out of control. The devil aura surged between him and the giant ape for a while before it slowly flowed towards the giant ape. In the end, it disappeared without a trace as if it had never been there. Pooh! Yang Qingji suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood. As the devil aura dissipated, his face gradually appeared under the cloak. It was a pale and thin teenager. Emo Tiange was a bit flabbergasted. Although Yang Qingji hadn't shown his face, the sharpness in his eyes and his smooth hands indicated that he wasn't very old. However, Emo Tiange still didn't expect him to be a thin and weak teenager who didn't look like a devil cultivator at all. Soon after, Ling Yunhe's crescent moon jade knife stopped the moment it touched the giant ape. The six people's hearts instantly jumped. Yang Qingji's ghost face banner didn't hit the giant ape, and instead suffered a backlash. If Ling Yunhe's attack also didn't work, it would be troublesome. If that happened, the other people's attacks would most likely be ineffective. Unfortunately, what they hoped wouldn't happen eventually happened. The giant ape raised its hand and touched it lightly. The crescent moon jade knife seemed to lose control and fell diagonally. Cough. Ling Yunhe also vomited a mouthful of blood. Whether it was his crescent moon jade knife or Yang Qingji's ghost face banner, both were their natal magic weapons. If their natal magic weapons were damaged, they would suffer a backlash on the cultivator's body. Seeing this, the other four people's faces instantly turned pale. Ling Yunhe and Yang Qingji weren't weak among them, but they were restrained by one move and even suffered a backlash. Facing this giant ape, what should they do? After knocking down Ling Yunhe's jade knife, the giant ape took a step forward with curiosity in its eyes. Tian Jiqian clenched his teeth and made a hand seal. The jade plate in his hand spun crazily again. "Everyone," he shouted, "protect me while I set up the formation." Ling Yunfei immediately stood in front of him. Emo Tiange knocked the heaven and earth fan in her hand and rushed forward with Tianqian. Fellow Taoist Qin Wei. Tianqian clenched the claws in his hand and shouted while pouncing on the giant ape. "You attract its attention and I'll wait for an opportunity to kill it." Emo Tiange nodded and unfolded the heaven and earth fan. With a crane cry, the red-crowned crane flew out of the fan and pounced on the giant ape. The next moment, Emo Tiange's expression changed. Before the red-crowned crane touched the giant ape, its figure gradually faded and finally disappeared. She didn't have time to think. The heaven and earth fan pressed down, and the mountains and rivers rushed out and pressed down on the giant ape. This time, nothing unexpected happened. Under the confused gaze of the giant ape, layers of mountains and rivers flashed and trapped the giant ape. The giant ape stretched out one hand and scratched one of its heads, as if it didn't know what was happening in front of it. At this moment, Tianqian shouted and pounced on the giant ape with the claws in his hand. The miracle didn't happen. The moment Tiansan's claws touched the giant ape, it was caught by one of the ape's hands. The ape blinked and waved its hand gently, throwing Tianqian away. Emo Tiange's face turned blue. The giant ape could actually throw Tianqian away, which meant it wasn't trapped by her heaven and earth fan at all. What on earth was this thing? Spiritual aura and devil aura were useless to it. Even her heaven and earth fan couldn't trap it. It had 3 heads and 6 arms, so it couldn't even launch a sneak attack. Fellow Taoists, come back. Ling Yunha's voice came from behind. Emotianga didn't have time to think. She waved the heaven and earth fan to stop the giant ape and returned to the formation with Tianqian. During the short time they had, Tianqian had finished setting up the formation. He looked at the jade plate in his hand nervously, then looked up at the giant ape in front of him and said, "Fellow Taoists, please think of a way. My formation can only block it for a while." Chapter 378. Solution. What solution could they have? Except for Tianqian, the other 5 people's expressions changed, but none of them spoke. Ling Yunha and Yang Qingji were the first to feel the strangeness of this 3-headed ape. In fact, this 3-headed ape's aura was only at the 7th rank, not even at the 8th rank of the nascent soul stage. However, no matter if it was spiritual energy or demonic energy, it was unable to cause any damage to this giant ape. It was just like how people said it was invulnerable. After a brief silence, Tianqian shouted again, "Hurry up! I can't hold it for long." At this time, the 3 giant apes were already approaching the 6 of them, and one of their arms stretched out towards them. Fortunately, they had Tianqian's formation, and with a buzz, a thin layer of spirit chi barrier appeared around the 6 of them, blocking the arm. The giant ape blinked, as if it didn't understand what was going on. Then, except for the 2 arms on its back, it swung its other 4 arms at them. Boom! The spiritual aura shield collided with the arm, creating a heavy sound. Following this loud noise, Tianqian's face turned pale. He shouted, "No, it's too powerful. I can only hold it for 5 more times." Ling Yunha asked anxiously, "Brother Tian, isn't your protective formation able to withstand several attacks from nascent soul cultivators? Why is it this time?" After another attack, Tianqian said while gasping for breath, "That being said, this monster's power is strange. It can't be measured by common sense. What should we do?" Ling Yunha asked the others as he didn't have time to ask for details. The people present were usually very opinionated, but this time, Ling Yunha couldn't get any ideas. Yang Qingji's ghost face banner was used, but it didn't work. Ling Yunha's crescent moon jade knife was still outside. Emotianga's heaven and earth fan couldn't trap it. Tianqian was a martial cultivator, but he was unexpectedly thrown out. Among the people present, except for Tianqian who maintained the formation, Ling Yunfei was the only one who hadn't done anything. His dual flying swords didn't seem special, so the others couldn't do anything. Presumably, he was the same. The 6 of them could be considered the best among core formation cultivators, but they were helpless against this monster in front of them. Boom! Another attack. Everyone's faces turned pale. Ling Yunfei hesitantly asked, "What is this thing?" Spiritual chi, devil chi, and sharp weapons are all unable to attack it. Could it be that they are unable to harm it at all? Ling Yunha's expression was solemn as he added, "Even the illusory array can't trap it." Fellow Taoist Qin, am I right? Emotinga was dumbfounded. She didn't expect Ling Yunha would notice this at such a critical moment. She nodded. "That's right. My magic weapon can create an illusory formation, but this monster isn't affected." When the others heard this, their expressions turned ugly. Be it immortal cultivators or devil cultivators, there were only a few ways to attack. The first was spiritual chi and devil chi. The second was a sharp weapon attack that relied on magic treasures. And the third was a deceitful attack like an array formation. Ling Yunha's and Yang Qingji's attacks proved that the first method was useless. Tianqian proved the second method. If Emotianga proved the third method, they would really be helpless against this giant ape. Boom! The spiritual energy shield around the 6 of them trembled, and its glow dimmed significantly. Tianqian's expression was strained, and beads of sweat rolled down his face. This was already the 3rd time. His protective barrier could only last 2 more times. Scatter. Ling Yunha made a decision the next moment. He glanced at the others and said hurriedly, "I'll lure this monster away. You guys go back to the entrance of the valley. If I'm fine, I'll come back to look for you." Second brother. Ling Yunfei was shocked. "Then you. The others were also surprised. With this giant ape's ability, if he lured it away by himself, it would probably be a disaster. Did Ling Yunhe want to sacrifice himself to protect the others? Boom! The fourth time. Ling Yunhe didn't have time to explain. He just said hurriedly, Yunfei, protect brother Tian. Boom! The fifth time, the spiritual energy shield collided with the giant ape's arm, emitting a dazzling white light. Then the shield trembled. After holding on for several seconds, it finally broke and disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Ling Yunhe stretched out his right hand, and the crescent moon jade knife on the ground flew back into his hand. He swung it, and the jade knife flew towards the giant ape with a sharp spiritual aura. With a chi sound, the jade knife cut through the aura around the giant ape. Soon after, the giant ape raised its arm, and the jade knife stopped in front of its arm. Ling Yunhe clenched his teeth and made a hand seal, injecting spiritual aura into the jade knife. The jade knife flew forward half an inch and touched the giant ape's knuckles. Woo! The giant ape let out a long howl and swung its arm, once again throwing the jade knife. Pooh! Ling Yunhe spat out a mouthful of blood. But this time, he didn't have time to adjust his breath. He grabbed some medicinal pills from his robe and stuffed them into his mouth. Then he dashed away. At the same time, the jade knife flew back into his hand. The giant ape clumsily turned around and looked at Ling Yunhe. In the end, it started to chase after Ling Yunhe. The others breathed sighs of relief and immediately scattered, choosing a direction to fly away. Among them, Ling Yunfei was always protecting Tian Jiqian, advancing and retreating together with him. Mo Tiange also chose a direction at random. Just as she was about 10 miles away, Fei Fei's voice entered her ears. Master, I'll go take a look. Just now, she didn't fasten the spiritual beast pouch, so when it spoke, Fei Fei had already jumped out and ran back. Fei Fei. Mo Tiange stopped for a moment then chased after it. What are you doing? Master, don't move. Fei Fei turned around and looked at her. I won't be in danger, but you won't necessarily be safe if you go. Seeing Fei Fei turn around again and nimbly disappear among the rocks, Mo Tiange helplessly patted her head. How could she forget that Fei Fei was no longer the Fei Fei from before? Now it was her, its master, who was being despised. But since Fei Fei said so, there shouldn't be any danger, right? Fei Fei could live in peace with other spiritual beasts, even ferocious beasts. However, this giant ape was clearly a monster, so she didn't know whether it could be counted as a spiritual beast or not. With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment, but still flew back. She just slowed down her speed. When she returned to her original position, there was no one around. The others had already scattered and fled for their lives. There was no trace of Fei Fei or that giant ape. Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then laid a defense formation around her and sat down cross-legged. She trusted Fei Fei's ability. Even if something were to happen, she would be here to support her. After a while, a cultivator's aura appeared around her. His cultivation level should be in the middle stage of the core formation realm. A black shadow flew closer and closer. It was Tiancan. Upon seeing Mo Tiange, he hesitated for a moment then walked towards her. Fellow Taoist Qin, you didn't leave? Mo Tiange didn't know how to explain this to him, so she said, No, I just came back. How come fellow Taoist Tiancan also came back? Tiancan looked around and said, I waited for a long time and thought it might be safer, so I came back to take a look. Fellow Taoist Qin Wei, how long have you been back? How's the situation? Mo Tiange shook her head. I came back not long ago. There's been no movement, so I don't know what's going on. Tiancan was silent. After a while, he also sat down next to her and waited. The two of them sat cross-legged. After waiting for a long time, they sensed another cultivator's aura coming from the edge of their divine senses. This time, it was Yang Qingji who came back. His face was pale, the corners of his mouth were stained with blood, and he staggered. Upon seeing Mo Tiange and Tiancan, he was startled. He narrowed his eyes and vigilance flashed across his eyes. Fellow Taoists, why did you come back? Didn't fellow Taoist Yang also come back? Tiancan snorted with a displeased attitude. Tiansan's words softened Yang Qingji's attitude. He said, I encountered a 6th-rank magical beast about 50 kilometers away from here. Since I was injured, I could only barely kill it. If I flew further, I didn't know what kind of strange things I would encounter, so I simply turned back. No wonder he looked so distressed. It seemed he had gone through another hard battle. Mo Tiange looked at Yang Qingji and asked, "How's fellow Taoist Yang's injury?" Upon hearing her question, Yang Qingji looked at her vigilantly and said, "It's not a big deal. I just need to rest for a while." Mo Tiange nodded. "Fellow Taoist Yang, you should take this opportunity to rest for a while." Yang Qingji cautiously looked at the two of them for a long time until Tianqin said impatiently, "What are you afraid of? We won't get any benefits from killing you now. Even if we get your magic weapon, it'll be useless if we can't get out." Upon hearing this, Yang Qingji's expression became a little better. He nodded at Mo Tiange, then sat down in her formation, and swallowed some medicinal pills to heal his injury. Mo Tiange looked at him, shook her head helplessly and looked away. Yang Qingji was even more suspicious than she was. He didn't dare to believe others who were nice to him. But Tianqin was rude to him, so he didn't doubt him. The three of them sat there for a long time, but nothing happened. Ling Yunhe didn't come back, and the giant ape didn't turn around. "Fellow Taoist Qin," Tianqin said, "what do you think is the current situation?" Mo Tiange opened her eyes and pondered for a while. Then she said, "No news is good news." Tianqin was stunned, then he sighed and nodded. She was right. In this situation, if there was news, it would most likely not be good news. They had seen the giant ape's ability with their own eyes. Ling Yunhe was definitely not its match if he went alone. Even if he could escape safely, he couldn't come out unscathed. Thinking about this, the three of them were a little dumbfounded. They were worried Ling Yunhe would turn against them later. But they didn't expect he would be willing to lead the danger away in the face of danger. Did he have a secret method to escape, or was he really trustworthy? Mo Tiange thought about it for a long time and sighed inwardly. The higher one's cultivation level was, the more cautious they were, and the more they didn't dare to trust the kindness of others. When the danger came just now, if everyone ran for their lives separately, maybe they wouldn't be as confused as they were now. After all, although they were invited by Ling Yunhe, they all received benefits from him. It was just a business deal, not a friendship. Of course, when she thought of Fei, Mo Tiange felt Ling Yunhe was most likely still alive. But she also couldn't figure out the reason why Ling Yunhe made such a decision. In this cultivation world, it was too difficult to believe other people just had good intentions. Chapter 379. After a while, Mo Tiange suddenly looked in the direction the giant ape left and said, "It's coming." Yang Qingji and Tiansan's expressions changed greatly. They sensed a mixed breath, and it was the strong breath of the giant ape. The two of them stood up and were about to separate when Mo Tiange said, "Fellow Taoists, please wait." Yang Qingji turned around and glared at her. Does fellow Taoist Qin have a way to subdue this thing? After what happened just now, Mo Tiange knew Yang Qingji was more suspicious than she was, so she didn't take it seriously and said to Tianqin, "Fellow Taoist, if you believe me, please wait here." Tianqin looked suspicious. What does fellow Taoist Qin want to do? At this time, the giant ape's breath got closer. Under the cover of its mixed breath, the three of them sensed another spiritual breath, which seemed to be a 5th-ranked demonic beast. Mo Tiange shook her head with a smile and turned to Yang Qingji. "Fellow Taoist Yang, if you don't want to take risks, you can leave now." Yang Qingji looked at her then stared at Tianqin for a while, but in the end, he didn't move. He really wanted to know why this woman was so calm. Was there something else she wanted to hide? The giant ape's figure soon appeared in front of them. Yang Qingji and Tianqin both held their magic weapons and were ready to attack. However, the next moment, Mo Tiange looked up and saw the little thing sitting on the giant ape's shoulder. She waved at it. Fei. Upon seeing her, Fei squeaked, jumped down from the giant ape's shoulder, and threw itself into her arms. "Master, don't let others know I can talk." At the same time, Fei's lazy voice rang in her head. "What do you want now?" Emotianga replied with her divine comprehension. Feifei buried its head on Emotianga's shoulder and chuckled in her mind. You're hiding your true colors. A spiritual beast that can talk will arouse other people's greed. Emotianga asked, Did you deal with that thing? Feifei sounded a little dissatisfied. It's not called that thing. It's called a stone. It actually has a name. Emotianga was surprised. Feifei was even more dissatisfied. Names aren't exclusive to you humans. Look at Xiaofan's family. They even have surnames. Fellow Taoist Qin, what's going on? Yang Qingji asked after recovering from his shock. This thing, it's not attacking us? Emotianga patted Feifei's head and imitated the cloud-soaring crane. She fed it a spiritual panacea. As a reward, then once again released it to play with the giant ape. Yang Qingji and Tianqin watched as the ape and the fox slowly walked away. Their questioning gazes immediately fell on Emotianga. Facing their gazes, Emotianga was very calm. This is my spiritual beast. It's a Feifei. Feifei. Yang Qingji was confused. What's that? Emotianga said. If it knows fellow Taoist Yang called it something, it'll definitely be unhappy. Upon seeing Yang Qingji's bewildered expression, Emotianga couldn't help but laugh. She explained, Feifei is a kind of divine beast from the distant past era. I found this Feifei in the outer sea. It is said that it has the bloodline of the ancient divine beast Feifei. Although it is a 5th-rank spirit beast, it doesn't know any magic. I usually raise it to relieve boredom, but I didn't expect it to be useful at a critical moment. Feifei, Tianqin murmured. All of a sudden, he raised his head and said, Is this the legendary Feifei that can live in peace with all spiritual beasts, and even ferocious beasts won't hurt it? Correct. Emotianga nodded. However, before today, I thought it was only a legend. After today's incident, I can confirm that this spiritual beast of mine is indeed a descendant of the Feifei. No wonder fellow Taoist Qin came back and was so calm. Tianqin exhaled. Only now did he finally calm down. Yang Qingji stared at the place where the giant ape and Feifei disappeared, remaining silent for a long time. Fellow Taoist Yang? Tianqin called him lazily and squinted at him. What do you think? Tiansan's attitude towards Yang Qingji couldn't be considered friendly. Now his tone was even more sarcastic. A flush appeared on Yang Qingji's pale face. He glared at Tianqin angrily. Tianqin sneered and his eyes were full of disdain. Fellow Taoist Tianqin. Yang Qingji stared at Tianqin and said coldly with his unruly eyes, Everyone has their own secrets. Why do you have to be so overbearing? Hearing those words, Tianqin's originally disdainful gaze was instantly replaced by fierceness. He stared fiercely at Yang Qingji. Apart from fierceness, there was also a trace of hesitation, as if he was unsure if what Yang Qingji said was true or not. Yang Qingji snorted and looked away. He said coldly to Emotianga, Fellow Taoist Qin, you allowed your spiritual beast to leave with that giant ape. Aren't you afraid something might happen to it? Emotianga was looking at the two of them, and felt they were very interesting. When she suddenly heard Yang Qingji's question, she didn't have time to react. After thinking for a while she said, They were very happy when they left. Spiritual beasts have the most accurate intuition. I think they'll be fine. Yang Qingji nodded and asked, Fellow Taoist Qin, where did you get this spiritual beast? Was it already in the 5th rank when you got it? This spiritual beast, Emotianga thought for a while and said, I got it in the North Sea, but I don't remember which part of the North Sea I got it from. I got this Feifei a long time ago. At that time, it was just born. The East Sea Tianqin mentioned should be the North Sea to Yunzhong. Oh, Yang Qingji asked with great interest. Fellow Taoist Qin, do you remember what's around that sea area? Is there anything that marks it? Emotianga looked at him and asked, Fellow Taoist Yang, do you want to find one? I do have this idea. Yang Qingji didn't hide anything. If I raise it to the level of fellow Taoist Qin, it'll be very useful in times like this. Tianqin glanced at Yang Qingji and said, Fellow Taoist Yang, you're a devil cultivator. As a devil, I'm afraid it's not easy for you to raise a spiritual beast, right? Yang Qingji looked at him coldly. As a Dao cultivator, Ling Yunhe even raised a strange beast that cultivates the aura of death. I'm a devil cultivator. Why can't I raise a spiritual beast? The two of them stared at each other with anger in their eyes. Mo Tiange felt helpless and said, "Fellow Taoists, this giant ape is solved for the time being. What should we do next? Do you have any opinions?" "Naturally, we'll find the others," Yang Qingji said. "I was entrusted by someone, so I'll have to do it myself. Besides, his way of doing things can be considered acceptable." In the end, Tianqin didn't argue. Let's find the others first." The three of them agreed. Mo Tiange took out a talisman from inside her robe and flicked it with her finger. The talisman burst into flames and turned into a flight light, disappearing into the sky. Before they left, Ling Yunhe had prepared several plans. He also told everyone in advance how to deal with them if they got separated. Mo Tiange didn't need to say anything now. She immediately sent out a summoning talisman. As long as the other three were fine, they should come back and meet up with her. Not long after Mo Tiange sent out her summoning talisman, a sound-transmitting talisman came from the sky. Mo Tiange took it. The talisman burned without any fire, and Ling Yunfei's voice rang out. "Fellow Taoist Qin, are you all right?" Mo Tiange frowned slightly when she received this talisman. This Ling Yunfei wasn't as simple as she thought. If he had the time to send a sound-transmitting talisman, he might as well come back and meet up with her. He was actually quite cautious. "I'm fine. Let's meet up quickly," Mo Tiange replied through a sound-transmitting talisman. After a while, two flight lights finally appeared at a low altitude. Before long, Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian landed on the ground. "Fellow Taoists, you've arrived?" Ling Yunfei looked at Yang Qingji and Tianqin in surprise. "We went back a long time ago," Tianqin said faintly. "Oh." Ling Yunfei looked at the three of them and asked with a puzzled expression, "What's going on? Fellow Taoists, can you explain it to us?" Tianqin and Yang Qingji weren't used to explaining, so they naturally looked at Mo Tiange after hearing what he said. Mo Tiange had no choice but to tell Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian what happened just now. "I see." After listening to the whole story, Ling Yunfei's eyes flashed with excitement. He asked Mo Tiange, "Fellow Taoist Qin, where did you get that spiritual beast?" Mo Tiange smiled. "Fellow Taoist Yang also asked me this question. To be honest, it's been a long time. I only remember it's the North Sea, but I don't remember where it is." "Oh." Ling Yunfei looked disappointed. The five of them waited for a while, but they still didn't see any trace of Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunfei couldn't wait any longer and asked first, "Did something happen to my second brother? He hasn't come back for so long." "That's hard to say." Tianqin snorted. The giant ape was attracted away by Fei, but before that, none of us knew whether fellow Taoist Ling was still alive or not. This Tianqin. It was fine if he didn't say anything, but as soon as he did, he always said unpleasant things. Mo Tiange thought for a while, then called Fei back with her divine comprehension. Before long, Fei appeared in everyone's line of sight, but the giant ape was nowhere to be seen. Squeak! In everyone's eyes, Fei wagged its tail and pounced on Mo Tiange, staying motionless on her body. At that moment, Fei's impatient voice rang in Mo Tiange's mind. "Why did you call me back?" Mo Tiange stroked its head, pretending to comfort the spiritual beast. With a smile on her face, she communicated with Fei using her divine comprehension. "I have to ask you, where's your stone?" "Of course it went home." Fei rubbed its head. "Is that what you want to ask?" "Of course not. Did you ask it where the person it was chasing just now was?" Fei tilted its head and thought for a while, then jumped down from her body. "He seems to have escaped, but I'm very familiar with his breath. I can find him. Let's go." Mo Tiange waved her hand at the others. "It'll take us to fellow Taoist Ling." The other four people looked at each other and finally followed her. Although it was Fei's first time in Carefree Valley, it seemed to be very familiar with its surroundings. It jumped left and right, jumped over several piles of rocks, and finally stopped in front of a big tree. "Squeak!" it called. "Here." With a glance, Mo Tiange saw Ling Yunhe lying under the tree, breathing weakly. Chapter 380. You're awake. Before Ling Yunhe opened his eyes, he heard a voice in his ears. The voice wasn't hostile, and he didn't feel any killing intent around him, so he thought blankly for a while before he rubbed his eyelids and opened his eyes. He was in a dark space. The top of his head was deep and dark, and he didn't know where it led to. He was surrounded by tangled vines looking very dirty. He was lying on the moist soil, with only a thin robe between him and the ground. He could even smell the fragrance of the soil. The spiritual aura inside his body circulated unimpeded, which startled him. He already had internal injuries, and he was attacked several times. In the end, he fainted due to the recoil of his aura. He thought his injuries were serious, but he didn't expect that his meridians and dantian were still intact when he woke up. He just lost some strength. Fellow Taoist Ling? Emo Tiange frowned when she saw the dazed Ling Yunhe in front of her. Could it be that his injuries were too serious, and he hadn't recovered yet? Hearing her voice, Ling Yunhe's attention slowly focused, and finally focused on her face. So it's fellow Taoist Qin. Ling Yunhe nodded at her, then turned to look at his surroundings and asked, "Did you save me?" Emo Tiange shook her head. "I didn't do it alone." She spoke politely, but Ling Yunhe felt a bit grateful. He sat up, looked around, then looked down at himself, and found that he didn't lose his magic weapon, and the spiritual beast vulture was still in his spiritual beast bag. He finally felt relieved. Where is this? Where are the others? How are they? They're all resting. This is a tree hole, Emo Tiange answered. Oh. Ling Yunhe nodded and touched his chest. What happened to my injuries? Emo Tiange said lightly. I happen to have some healing medicinal pills. After fellow Taoist Yunfei exchanged them with me and examined them, I gave them to you. Really? Ling Yunhe pressed his dantian and took a deep look at Emo Tiange. Fellow Taoist Qin's medicinal pills are really extraordinary. I thank you. He was well aware of his own injuries. There were internal injuries in his dantian, and on top of that, he had forcefully stimulated his Zhen Yuan to escape from the giant ape's pursuit. It could be said that even if he returned alive and won the position of sect leader, it would take him years, or even decades to recover to his original state. But now, Emo Tiange's medicinal pills managed to control his injuries in time, leaving only some residual injuries. If he could recuperate properly, it could save him at least half of the time. More importantly, his current injuries were not serious, so he had a greater chance of winning the sect leader selection. Seeing that Emo Tiange only smiled and didn't answer, Ling Yunhe continued to ask, "By the way, what happened in the end? How did you find me? Where's that giant ape?" After Emo Tiange succinctly explained what happened, Ling Yunhe stared at her and said with joy, "So that's how it is. In that case, my biggest fortune this time is that I was able to invite fellow Taoist Qin to accompany me. If it wasn't for Emo Tiange, although he managed to escape from the giant ape's clutches, fainting in Carefree Valley alone would have been a matter of 9 deaths and 1 life, and other people wouldn't have been able to find him so quickly. Now he only felt lucky. He invited Emo Tiange because he thought she had a lot of spiritual treasures, was steady in handling matters, and her cultivation level was also pretty good, so she should be able to help him. He didn't expect her to be of such great use. Emo Tiange just smiled at him. Her scrutinizing gaze fell on him, and she suddenly asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you lure the giant ape away by yourself? Weren't you afraid of losing your life?" Ling Yunhe rubbed the space between his eyebrows and said tiredly, "I thought I had some secret techniques, so I should have been able to escape. It's just that I didn't expect my injuries to be too serious. Although I managed to escape, I couldn't hold on for a while." He then turned to look at Emo Tiange and asked, "How about you? How's fellow Taoist Yang's injuries?" Emo Tiange said. Fellow Taoist Yang's injuries looked terrible, but they didn't damage his dantian or meridians. Devil cultivators' bodies are stronger than ours, so presumably, he'll recover soon. That's good. Ling Yunhe heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. Then we can continue. Fellow Taoist Ling. Emo Tiange's gaze flickered. Everything you did was to let the search for the fretless fruit proceed smoothly? Ling Yunha's smile froze. He stared at Emotienga, neither saying anything nor moving. After a while, he shifted his gaze away and said with a smile, I can only say that while we're still companions, you can trust me. Emotienga noticed he said, you, instead of you. She frowned. Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you say that? Could it be that you think other people aren't trustworthy? Ling Yunha shook his head and gave her a meaningful look. Fellow Taoist Qin, whether other people are trustworthy or not, you know very well. Emotienga was silent. They were all outstanding core formation cultivators. Because of this, they didn't dare to trust others easily and couldn't trust others easily. Apart from Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian, Tianqin was too mysterious, Yang Qingji was too suspicious, and she was too cautious. In fact, none of them were trustworthy. However, what Ling Yunha said just now showed that he regarded her as a trustworthy person. Emotienga couldn't figure out what he was thinking. She tilted her head and thought for a while, then asked directly, Do you think I'm trustworthy? Ling Yunha showed a faint smile, then sighed tiredly again. At this moment, he didn't seem to mind showing his exhaustion in front of Emotienga at all. I was selected as one of the candidates for the head of Juyan sect. So of course I have a good eye for people. People like fellow Taoist Qin can be befriended but not bullied. If I treat you with courtesy, I'll return the courtesy, but if I always guard against you, I'll make you feel disgusted. Fellow Taoist Qin, am I right? Emotienga looked surprised. Even she herself hadn't thought about it carefully, but Ling Yunha's conclusion made her think it was right. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. If people offend me, I'll kill them. Ling Yunha smiled when he saw the expression on Emotienga's face. This time, his smile wasn't like his usual one. Although it was cordial, it also kept people at a distance. Instead, it carried a bit of childlike complacency and a carefreeness without any burden. I'm right? Emotienga stared at the top of the tree for a long time, then smiled helplessly. If I didn't know better, I'd think fellow Taoist Ling and I have known each other for a long time. The smile on Ling Yunha's face grew wider. After laughing for a while, he said, Fellow Taoist Qin, why aren't you a man? Ha! Emotienga didn't understand. Ling Yunha continued, It's not that I look down on women, but... He paused for a long time and didn't finish his sentence. However, Emotienga somewhat understood what he meant. It was always more convenient to make friends with people of the same sex than with people of the opposite sex. And it was easier to become confidants. At this time, she suddenly thought of Nie Wuxiang. If it weren't for their opposing positions and those unclear grudges, maybe she and Nie Wuxiang could become confidants? She wondered how Nie Wuxiang was now. Did she find a way to control her own primordial devil aura? Fellow Taoist Qin? Emotienga regained her train of thought. Ling Yunha looked at her and asked, Are you thinking of someone else? Huh. As soon as she met Ling Yunha's gaze, Emotienga knew he misunderstood. However, this misunderstanding didn't need to be explained, so she acquiesced. Upon seeing her expression, a trace of disappointment flashed across Ling Yunha's eyes. When he realized this, he was startled. He heard Emotienga's question in time. Fellow Taoist Ling, since you know how to read people, what do you think of other people? Ling Yunha thought for a while, then said, Fellow Taoist Yang was recommended by Yunfei. He's quite famous among the core formation cultivators in Yunzhong. Don't underestimate him, just because he's only in the early stage of the core formation realm. As the proud disciple of Guifeng Devil Monarch, one of the 3 devil monarchs in Yunzhong, his aptitude goes without saying. Moreover, it's said that Guifeng Devil Monarch regarded him as his direct disciple and passed all his secret techniques to him. As long as he forms his nascent soul, after Guifeng Devil Monarch abdicates, he'll inherit the position of Guifeng City Lord. Guifeng City? Oh, Ling Yunha said with a smile. I forgot again. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't a cultivator from Yunzhong, so you don't know much about the cultivation world in Yunzhong. Devil cultivators are quite different from us. They value individual ability more, so there aren't many so-called great sects like us. On the contrary, devil domains established by devil cultivators with great divine power are a bit more powerful. Guifang City is a devil domain established by Guifang Devil Monarch 1,000 years ago. In northern Qilin country, and even in the whole of Yunzhong, it has great power. It can be said that as Guifang Devil Monarch's beloved disciple, Yang Qingji plays an important role in Yunzhong. I see. Emotianga was moved. Since fellow Taoist Yang has such an identity, he can get whatever he wants. Why would he take the risk to make a deal with fellow Taoist Ling? Upon hearing this question, Ling Yunhe faintly sighed. His gaze once again revealed his exhaustion. How could it be that easy? Although it's good to have a big tree to lean on, there'll always be conflicts when too many people fight for that little shade. No matter how glorious your identity is, you can't do as you please. Seeing his expression and thinking of the internal strife in Ling clan she heard before, Emotianga somewhat understood. In the eyes of outsiders, Ling Yunhe was very glorious. He was a genius disciple, loved by the old ancestor, valued by the sect, and could mobilize so many resources to participate in the sect head selection. However, because of this, he didn't get along well with his clansmen. They fought openly and secretly, and he even got injured. In order to avoid this, he pretended to be unable to restore his cultivation level, and pretended to be down and out. The helplessness and depression in this matter was very difficult for outsiders to understand. Although Emotianga was also a disciple of a great sect, neither her master nor Qin she participated in the power struggle. And they also didn't have the burden of a clan, so they were always relaxed. She suddenly remembered that her master was a nascent soul cultivator and had a junior like Qin Shi. But he unexpectedly never thought about establishing a cultivation clan. Was it because of this reason? Guifang Devil Monarch didn't only have one disciple. It's precisely because he's the most valued that some things are more difficult to handle. Ling Yunhe smiled and continued. As for that fellow Taoist Tiancan, he pondered for a while then shook his head. I met that person by accident. He's very strong, but he's too mysterious. Even now, I still can't tell whether he's a friend or a foe. At this point, Ling Yunhe once again looked at Emotianga with a meaningful gaze. However, fellow Taoist Qin must have a good relationship with this fellow Taoist Tiancan. Emotianga smiled faintly and didn't explain further. What about your younger brother and fellow Taoist Tian? Ling Yunhe was stunned. What do they have to say? Emotianga understood and nodded. It seems they're the people fellow Taoist Ling trusts the most. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't have asked them to come with me, Ling Yunhe said. Yunfei has been close to me since we were young. We're both from a branch family of Ling clan, and we're close in age. We've been supporting each other for so many years. As for brother Tian, we've also been friends for many years. For me, he's even more reliable than some people with the same surname. In other words, the two of them are people I don't need to guard against. Ling Yunhe spoke from the bottom of his heart, as if he didn't hide anything. This kind of trust made Emotianga feel a bit overboard. She thought Ling Yunhe was right. With her character, she could be befriended but couldn't be deceived. Since other people trusted her, she couldn't do anything that betrayed their trust. This wasn't good. The more he said, the more she would be bound, wouldn't it? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.